Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Cryptic Corpse. I am your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it in your part of the world? Now find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Marie Boudreau, but everyone calls me Ree. I live alone in the deepest part of the Louisiana swamp, where the water is black as coffee and the trees grow so thick you can't see the sky. I wasn't always a swamp girl. 10 years ago, I was a medic in the army fixing up soldiers in Korea. I saw things there that still wake me up at night. Boys with their guts hanging out, calling for their mothers. I tried to save them all, but I couldn't, not even close. When I came home, I couldn't stand being around people anymore. The noise, the crowds, the way everyone complained about little. Cuts and bruises when I'd seen men die from wounds that could fill a bucket. So I came out here to the quiet. Now I hunt alligators for a living. It's not much, but it keeps me fed and gives me something to do with my hands. The thing is, I can't just kill them and walk away. I have to make it right first. This morning was like every other. I'd caught a big bull gator the night before, probably 12 feet long. He was already dead when I pulled him up to my little dock, but I still had work to do. I laid him out on the wooden planks and opened my medical bag. The same bag I carried in Korea, though most of the military stuff was long gone. Now it held fishing line for stitches, antiseptic, bandages, and my old surgical tools. "Sorry, old boy," I whispered to the gator, running my hand along his rough hide. "This won't hurt." I cleaned every wound on his body, even though he couldn't. Feel it. Stitched up the holes where my hooks had caught him, wrapped his tail where the rope had rubbed it raw. It probably sounds crazy, but it made me feel better, like I was fixing something instead of just taking. The sun was coming up over the water, painting everything gold and green. Spanish moss hung from the cypress trees like old wedding veils. It was peaceful out here. Quiet, except for the bugs and the birds and the splash of a fish jumping somewhere in the distance. I was just finishing up with the gator when I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was a whimper, soft and weak, like a hurt animal trying not to cry. I looked around, but all I could see were the trees and the black water. The sound came again, closer this time. It was coming from deeper, in the swamp, where even I didn't like to go. I should have ignored it, should have gone inside and started breakfast like any normal day. But I couldn't. That's always been my problem. When something's hurt, I have to help. Even when I shouldn't. Even when it might get me killed. I grabbed my medical bag and my rifle, untied my boat and headed toward the sound. The deeper I went into the swamp, the stranger things got. The water was perfectly still, like glass. No bugs buzzing, no birds singing, even the wind had stopped. And then I saw something that made my hands shake on the paddle. There was a deer, standing in the shallow water about 50 yards ahead, but something was wrong with it, very wrong. The deer had been shot. I could see the bullet hole in its side, big and messy, the kind of wound that kills fast. But the deer wasn't dead. It was standing there, calm as could be, like nothing had happened. The bullet hole was healed, not scarred over like it should be after weeks or months, healed, perfect and smooth like it had never been hurt at all. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the heat was getting to me. But when I looked again, the deer was still there, still impossible. That's when I noticed my hands were shaking, and it wasn't from fear. It was excitement. Because for the first time in 10 years, I was looking at something I couldn't explain. Something that might mean I wasn't as good at fixing things as I thought I was. Or maybe, just maybe, something else was doing the fixing around here. I sat in my boat for a long time, just staring at that deer. It looked back at me with big, brown eyes, not scared at all, like it knew something I didn't. After a while, it turned and walked away into the thick trees. Just like that, it was gone. I paddled back home with my heart still beating fast. Maybe I was losing my mind. Living alone for so long can do that to a person. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't there. But when I got back to my dock, I found something that made me stop cold. My medical bag was open, wide open, with everything spread out on the wooden planks. The same planks where I'd left the gator. The gator was gone. I looked around thinking maybe it had slid back into the water, but there was no blood trail, no drag marks, nothing. It was just gone, like it had never been there at all. I picked up my things one by one, bandages, antiseptic, my old surgical scissors. Everything was there, but they weren't where I'd left them. The bandages were rolled up neat and tight, neater than I ever made them. The scissors were clean and shiny, like someone had just polished them. And my fishing line, the stuff I used for stitches, was tied in perfect little knots. The kind of knots doctors use in surgery, the kind I hadn't made in 10 years. "What the hell?" I said out loud. The swamp didn't answer. I spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of it. Maybe I'd cleaned everything up and forgot. Maybe the stress was getting to me worse than I thought. I'd done stranger things in Korea when I was tired and scared. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump. The creaking of my little house on its stilts. The splash of fish in the water below. The wind in the trees. And then I heard it again. That same whimper from the morning. I got up and looked out my window. The moon was full, turning everything silver and black. The water looked like a mirror. Standing at the edge of the trees was another animal, a raccoon this time. It was holding up one of its little hands, and even in the moonlight, I could see something was wrong with it. The hand was mangled, crushed, like something heavy had stepped on it. But the raccoon wasn't acting hurt. It was just standing there, holding up that broken hand like it was showing it to me, like it wanted me to fix it. I grabbed my medical bag and headed for the door. But before I could open it, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps, heavy ones, walking around my house. I pressed my face to the window and looked down. The water under my house was only 3 feet deep, but I couldn't see anybody walking through it. The footsteps kept going, slow and steady, like someone was taking their time, like they knew I wasn't going anywhere. The raccoon was still there, still holding up its hurt hand. But now there were others. A possum with a hole in its side, a rabbit with a broken leg, all of them just standing there waiting, all of them hurt, but not acting hurt. The footsteps stopped right under my window. I held my breath and waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. Someone was climbing up the stilts, slow and careful, like they didn't want the old wood to creak. I grabbed my rifle and backed away from the window. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. The climbing stopped. Everything went quiet. I waited there in the dark for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. No more footsteps, no more sounds. When the sun came up, I looked outside. The animals were gone, but sitting on my dock, right where I'd left the gator yesterday, was my medical bag. It was open again, and this time there was something new inside. A piece of paper, old and yellow. Written on it in handwriting I didn't recognize were the words, "Thank you for your service." That's when I noticed the storm clouds moving in from the south. Big black clouds that meant serious trouble, the kind of storm that could trap you in the swamp for days. I ran to check my boat. The engine wouldn't start. The spark plugs were gone, taken clean out. I was stuck. The storm hit that afternoon like a freight train. Rain came down so hard I couldn't see 10 feet past my windows. The wind howled through the trees, and my little house shook on its stilts like it might fall apart any second. I spent the day trying to fix my boat engine, but whoever took those spark plugs knew what they were doing. Without them, I wasn't going anywhere. As the sun went down, the storm got worse. Lightning lit up the sky every few seconds, and thunder rolled across the water like cannon fire. I made myself some dinner and tried to read one of my old medical books, but I couldn't focus. Every time the lightning flashed, I thought I saw something moving outside. Shapes in the water. shadows between the trees. Around midnight, everything went quiet. The rain stopped, the wind died down, even the thunder moved off into the distance. It was like someone had just turned off a switch. That's when I heard the voice. Marie. It was soft and low, coming from right outside my door. A man's voice, but strange, like he was talking through water. Marie, I know you can hear me. I grabbed my rifle and crept to the window. The moon was out again and I could see the water around my house. It was perfectly still, like glass. You've been taking care of my patients, the voice said. I wanted to thank you. Who's there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. A fellow doctor, like you. That made my blood run cold. I wasn't a doctor. I was just a medic. But somehow this person knew about my medical training. What do you want? I asked. To help you the way you've been helping my patients. I looked down at the water and saw something that made my heart stop. There was a man standing in the shallow water below my house, but he wasn't quite right. He was too tall, too thin. His arms hung down, too long, and when he moved, it was like his joints bent the wrong way. You have skilled hands, he said, looking up at me. In the moonlight, I could see his face. It was human, but wrong. Like someone had put it together from memory instead of looking at a real person. You've been wasting your talent out here, fixing dead things. I can help you fix the living. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the rifle. Oh, but you do. You've seen my work. The deer, the raccoon, all of them were dying when I found them, but I fixed them, made them better than they were before. He started walking toward the stilts that held up my house. Each step made a wet, sucking sound in the mud. Stay back, I yelled, pointing the rifle at him. He stopped and looked up at me. When he smiled, I saw that his teeth were too sharp, too many. You don't want to hurt me, Marie. You're a healer. It's not in your nature. He was right, and that scared me more than anything else. Even pointing a gun at this thing, I couldn't bring myself to pull the trigger. What are you? I whispered. I'm what you could become, if you let me help you. He started climbing up the stilts. I could hear the wood creaking under his weight. I backed away from the window and ran to my bedroom. I slammed the door and pushed my dresser in front of it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely move the furniture. Then I heard footsteps on my porch. The front door opened with a long, slow creak. Marie, the voice called. Don't be afraid. I'm here to make you better. I could hear him walking through my house. His footsteps were wet and heavy, like he was dripping with swamp water. He stopped right outside my bedroom door. I know you're in there, and I know you're hurt. All that pain from the war, all those boys you couldn't save. I can take that away. The doorknob turned. I can make you into the perfect healer. Someone who never loses a patient. Someone who can fix anything. The door pushed against the dresser. It moved an inch, then another. All you have to do is let me touch you. I pressed my back against the far wall and raised the rifle. But my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't aim straight. The dresser scraped across the floor. The door opened wider. A long, pale hand reached around the edge of the door. The fingers were too long, with too many joints, and I could see surgical scars all over the skin, like someone had taken it apart and put it back together. Just one touch, the voice said, and all your pain will go away. The hand reached toward me. I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. The sound was like thunder in that small room. When I opened my eyes, the hand was gone. But there was no blood on the wall behind where it had been. Instead, there was a hole in the wall, a perfect round hole, like the bullet had just vanished into nothing. And from outside, I heard laughter. Thank you, Marie. Now I know you're ready. I ran to the window and looked out. The thing was standing in the water again, but now I could see him clearly. His whole body was covered in scars, like mine. But his scars were different. They moved and shifted, opening and closing, like mouths. "Tomorrow night," he called up to me, "when the moon is dark, I'll come back for you." He turned and walked away into the trees. As he moved, I could see other shapes following him. Animals, walking on their hind legs like people. All of them moving wrong, like their bones had been taken apart and put back together. I sat on my bed until the sun came up, holding my rifle and trying not to think about what I'd seen. But I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, about making me into the perfect healer. And the worst part was, a small part of me wanted to know what that felt like. I didn't sleep that day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face. Those two long fingers reaching for me. I kept my rifle close and checked the windows. Every few minutes, the sun was going down again, and I knew he'd be back soon. The moon would be dark tonight, just like he said. I had to get out of here. Storm or no storm, broken boat or not, I had to try. I gathered up my things and loaded them into the boat. Maybe I could paddle to safety. It would take all night, but it was better than waiting here for that thing to come back. I was just about to push off from the dock when I heard something that made me stop. Music. It was faint, coming from deep in the swamp. Old jazz music, the kind they used to play in New Orleans when I was a kid. But there was something wrong with it. It kept skipping like a broken record. I should have ignored it, should have paddled away as fast as I could. But that music, it reminded me of better times, before the war, before I saw all those boys die, before I came out here to hide. I tied the boat back up and followed the sound. The music got louder. As I walked deeper into the swamp, I had to use my flashlight to see where I was going. The trees were so thick overhead that no moonlight got through. After about 10 minutes, I saw a light ahead. Not electric light, firelight, like torches or candles. I crept closer and hid behind a big cypress tree. What I saw made my stomach turn. There was a clearing in the swamp, maybe 30 feet across. Someone had cleared away all the small trees and bushes, but they'd left the big cypress trees standing around the edge, like walls. In the middle of the clearing was a table, a long, wooden table, like the kind you'd see in an old hospital. And hanging from the tree branches all around it were medical tools, scalpels, scissors, clamps, needles, all of them old and rusty but clean, like someone had just washed them. The music was coming from an old radio sitting on a tree stump. It kept playing the same song over and over, skipping in the same place every time. But the worst part wasn't the table or the tools. It was what was lying on the table. Bodies, human bodies, all laid out in a row. But they weren't dead. I could see their chests moving up and down. They were breathing, and they were all missing pieces. One was missing an arm, another had no legs, a third had a hole where his stomach should be, but they weren't bleeding. The wounds were sewn up neat and clean, like a doctor had done it, like someone was taking them apart piece by piece. I started to back away, but my foot stepped on a stick. It snapped loud in the quiet. The music stopped. "Marie!" The voice came from right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there. "You came. I knew you would." I ran, crashed through the trees and bushes, not caring about the noise. My flashlight bounced around, showing me glimpses of twisted roots and hanging moss. Behind me, I could hear him following, not running, walking, like he knew I couldn't get away. I made it back to my house and slammed the door, pushed the table in front of it and all the chairs too, but I knew it wouldn't stop him. That's when I noticed something on my kitchen table. My medical bag was open again, but this time there were new things inside. Things that hadn't been there before. A bone saw, old and yellow with age, a set of surgical needles sharp as razors, and bottles of medicine I didn't recognize, with labels written in handwriting I couldn't read. Underneath it all was another note. "For your new patients, I heard footsteps on the porch. "Marie, open the door. Your training is about to begin." The doorknob turned, even though I'd locked it. "Those people you saw tonight, they were all healers once. Doctors, nurses, medics like you. I've been improving them, making them better." The door pushed against the table. It moved an inch. "But they weren't ready. They fought me, tried to run. That's why they're still on the table." Another push. The table scraped across the floor. "You're different, Marie. You understand suffering. You want to heal it. That's why I'm going to make you perfect." The door opened wide enough for him to reach his arm through. That same pale hand, covered in surgical scars. "Just take my hand and I'll show you how to heal anything, how to bring back the dead, how to fix every broken thing in this world." His fingers stretched toward me. I looked at my rifle, but I knew it wouldn't help. I'd already tried shooting him. Then I looked at the medical tools he'd left for me. The bone saw, the surgical needles, and I remembered something from my army training, something important. If you can't heal a wound, sometimes you have to make it worse before it gets better. I picked up the bone saw. "That's it," he said, pushing more of his arm through the door. "Take up your tools. Begin your work." But instead of taking his hand, I raised the saw and brought it down on his wrist as hard as I could. He screamed, not like a human scream, like metal tearing, like glass. Breaking, black blood sprayed across my kitchen wall. His hand fell to the floor and started crawling toward me like a spider. "You can't hurt me," he gasped. "I can heal anything." But as I watched, the stump of his wrist stayed the same, raw and bleeding, not healing at all. "I can heal anything," he said again, but his voice was weaker now. "Anything except yourself," I finished. That's when I understood. This thing could fix every broken creature in the swamp, but he couldn't fix his own wounds, and I had just given him a wound that would never heal. He pulled his arm back through the door, and I heard him stumble away from the house. "This isn't over, Marie," he called out. "I'll be back, and next time you won't be so lucky." But his voice was getting fainter, weaker. I looked down at the hand still crawling across my floor. It was slowing down, the fingers curling up like a dying spider. For the first time in days, I smiled. Maybe I wasn't as helpless as I thought. The hand on my floor stopped moving just as the sun came up. It curled up into a ball and turned to dust, like it had been dead for 100 years. I should have felt safe, should have been happy that the thing was hurt and gone. But I knew better. He'd said he'd be back, and I believed him. I spent the morning getting ready. I cleaned my rifle and loaded it with fresh bullets. I sharpened every knife I had. I even made some simple traps around my house using fishing, line and hooks. But most importantly, I gathered up every sharp medical tool I could find, because now I knew the truth. This thing could heal anyone and anything, except himself. Every cut I gave him would stay forever. Every wound would keep hurting. As the day went on, I started hearing sounds from the swamp, animals crying out in pain, but not normal animal sounds. These sounded almost human. By evening, I realized what was happening. He was trying to heal himself using the animals, taking pieces from them to replace what I'd cut off. But it wasn't working. The sounds kept getting worse. When the sun went down, everything got quiet again. I sat in my kitchen with my rifle across my lap and waited. The severed hand had left a stain on my floor that looked like a dark star. I couldn't stop staring at it. Around midnight, I heard him coming back. But this time was different. Instead of walking, he was dragging himself. I could hear him pulling his body through the mud and water, breathing hard like he was in pain. "Marie!" he called out, but his voice was weak and shaky. "Marie, you have to help me." I went to the window and looked down. He was lying in the shallow water under my house, and he looked terrible. His left arm was gone from the wrist up, and the wound was black and infected. He'd tried to attach animal parts to replace it, a deer leg, a gator tail, a bird wing, but none of them had taken. They just hung there, rotting. "Please," he begged. You're a healer. You took an oath to help people. You're not people, I said. I was once. A long time ago, I was a doctor during the Civil War. I just wanted to save lives. But when the yellow fever came, I couldn't save anyone. So I made a deal, traded my soul for the power to heal. He tried to pull himself closer to my house, but he was too weak. But the power came with a price. I could heal everyone except myself. Every wound I've ever taken has stayed with me. 150 years of pain, Marie. You can't imagine what that's like. Part of me felt sorry for him, the part that still remembered being a medic, wanting to ease suffering wherever. I found it. But then I thought about those people on the table, the ones he'd been cutting apart piece by piece. What about your patients? I asked. The ones in the clearing? They're not patients anymore. They're experiments. I've been trying to find a way to transfer my wounds to someone else. Someone who could heal from them. That's why you wanted me. Yes. Your medical training, your guilt about the soldiers you couldn't save, it makes you perfect. You would have taken my pain willingly. He was right, and that scared me. Even now, looking down at this monster, I wanted to help him. It was like a sickness in my blood. I can still make you perfect, he whispered. We can share the power. You heal others, I heal you. We could save everyone. For a moment, I almost believed. Him almost climbed down to help. Then I remembered the hand crawling across my floor. The people on that table, still breathing while he cut them apart. I picked up the bone saw. Marie, what are you doing? Instead of answering, I started cutting through one of the support beams that held up my house. The old wood was soft and rotten. It didn't take long. Marie, stop! I moved to the next beam, then the next. The house started to creak and sway. You'll kill us both, he screamed. Maybe, I said, but at least you'll stay dead. I cut through the last beam. My house tilted and fell into the swamp with a crash that shook the trees. Water rushed in through the broken walls and windows. I managed to grab onto a floating piece of wood, but the creature wasn't so lucky. The house had fallen right on top of him, pinning him under the water. I could see him struggling underneath, trying to push the heavy beams off his body. But he was too weak, and the wounds I'd given him were still bleeding. Please, he gasped, his head barely above water. I don't want to die like this. You should have thought of that before you started cutting people up, I said. The water was getting deeper. Soon, his head went under completely. I floated there on my piece of wood and watched the bubbles come up for a while. Then they stopped. The rescue boat found me the next morning, half dead from cold and exhaustion. I told them my house had collapsed in the storm, which was true enough. They never found his body. But they didn't find the clearing either, or the people on the table. When I led the sheriff back there a few days later, it was just empty swamp, like none of it had ever happened. I moved away after that, went to live with my sister in Baton Rouge. Got a job at the hospital there, working as a nurse. It felt good to heal people again, knowing they'd stay healed. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that jazz music playing. And I wonder if I really killed him, or if he's still out there somewhere. Still looking for the perfect healer. Still trying to find someone who can take away his pain. I keep a bone saw in my medical bag, just in case. Because some wounds are meant to stay open. Some pain is meant to last forever. My name is David Redfern, but everyone used to call me Dave. I say used to because I don't talk to many people anymore. Not since I lost everything. I'm sitting here in my hidden camp, deep in a slot canyon in the Nevada desert. The red rock. Walls tower above me like prison bars. My tent is tucked between two huge boulders, and behind me are caves where I keep my collection, my most precious finds. The things that cost me my career, my reputation, and maybe my soul. I used to be somebody important. Dr. David Redfern, they called me. I had a fancy office at the university and students who hung on my every word. I studied ancient cultures, wrote papers about Native American history. I was respected. But respect doesn't pay the bills when you have gambling debts that keep growing. That's when I started taking things from the dig sites. Just small pieces at first. A pottery shard here, an arrowhead there. Who would miss them? I told myself I was saving these artifacts, preserving them for future study. The university would just lock them away in some dusty storage room anyway. But then I found the burial sites, sacred places where ancient people laid their dead to rest. The artifacts there were worth real money. Bone knives, ceremonial jewelry, carved totems. Collectors would pay thousands for authentic pieces like these. I know what you're thinking. I know it was wrong, but you don't understand the pressure I was under. Men in expensive suits were knocking on my door, demanding money I didn't have. They weren't the kind of people who accept excuses. So here I am, 3 years later, living like a hermit in this canyon. I've mapped every cave, every hidden passage. I know where the old people buried their treasures, and business has been good, too good. Yesterday morning I was working on a new site I'd discovered. The bones were old, really old, probably 1,000 years, maybe more. There was a knife made from human bone, carved with symbols I'd never seen before. Beautiful work. It would fetch at least $10,000 from the right buyer. I was so excited I could barely sleep. But when I went back this morning, something was wrong. The hole I dug was filled in, not just covered over with loose dirt, but packed tight like it had never been disturbed. The rocks I'd moved were back in their original places. Even the brush I'd cleared away was growing again, as if it had been there for years. I stared at that spot for a long time, my heart pounding. This wasn't possible. Nobody else knew about this place. I'd made sure of that. The canyon was 40 miles from the nearest road, and most people couldn't even find the entrance. I grabbed my shovel and started digging again. The dirt was hard. Harder than it should have been. It took me 3 hours to get back to where I was yesterday, but when I reached the bottom, the artifacts were gone. All of them, even the bone knife. My hands were shaking as I climbed out of the hole. Someone was messing with me. Had to be. Maybe another artifact hunter had followed me out here. Competition was getting fierce these days, with all the new laws making it harder to sell Native American pieces. I walked back to my camp, trying to stay calm. But as I got closer, I could see something was different. My storage caves looked the same from the outside, but I could feel it. Something had changed. Inside the first cave, my artifacts were still there. Hundreds of pieces I'd collected over the years, each one carefully labeled and catalogued, but they weren't where I'd left them. The pottery was arranged in circles. The jewelry was laid out in patterns. The weapons were pointing toward the back of the cave, toward the deepest, darkest corner. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just staring. Then I heard it. A sound like singing, but so faint I couldn't be sure it was real. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. An old song, in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood. It was getting dark. In the desert, night comes fast and brings dangers with it. Rattlesnakes, coyotes, flash floods if it rains in the mountains. But I wasn't worried about any of those things anymore. I was worried about whatever had moved my artifacts, whatever had filled in my dig site, whatever was singing in the empty desert. As I made dinner over my small fire, I kept looking over my shoulder. The canyon walls seemed taller in the darkness, leaning in like they were trying to crush me. The wind through the rocks made clicking sounds, like bones tapping together. I told myself I was being paranoid. Too many years alone in the desert, too much guilt eating away at my mind. But deep down, I knew something was watching me, something that didn't want me here, something that knew exactly what I'd been doing. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made me jump. The wind through the canyon, an owl hooting somewhere in the darkness. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. I kept my flashlight close and checked the caves 3 times before morning. When the sun finally came up, I felt a little better. Daylight has a way of making your fears seem silly. I made coffee and told myself I was just stressed. Too much time alone. Too much worry about money. That had to be it. But then I walked into the storage cave again. The artifacts had moved. Again. This time they were arranged differently. The pottery formed a perfect spiral on the ground. The arrowheads were stuck into the cave wall in a pattern that looked almost like writing. And in the center of it all, sitting on a flat rock like it was on display, was the bone knife I'd lost yesterday. My hands started shaking. I reached out to grab the knife, but stopped. Something about it looked different. The carvings seemed deeper somehow, more detailed, like someone had been working on it all night. I picked it up anyway. It was cold, colder than it should have been, after sitting in the desert heat. But it was beautiful. The most perfect piece I'd ever found, worth more money than everything else combined. I slipped it into my backpack and tried to act normal. Just another day of hunting for artifacts. Just another day of trying to stay. One step ahead of the men who wanted their money. But normal was over for me. I could feel it. I decided to check on my truck. It was parked about a mile away, hidden behind some rocks where nobody could see it from the road. I walked the familiar path, but something felt wrong. The desert was too quiet. No birds, no insects, no lizards scurrying across the rocks. Even the wind had stopped. When I reached my truck, my heart sank. The hood was up. That was my first clue. Something was very wrong. I never left the hood up. I looked under it and wanted to scream. Someone had cut my belts. All of them. The radiator. Hoses were sliced clean through. The battery cables were severed. My truck was dead. But here's the thing that really scared me. The cuts were too clean, too perfect, like they'd been done with a very sharp knife. A knife that could slice through thick rubber like it was paper. A knife like the bone blade in my backpack. I stood, there in the blazing sun, 40 miles from anywhere, looking at my destroyed truck. No cell phone signal out here, no way to call for help. The nearest person was probably a day's walk away, across some of the most dangerous desert in Nevada. I was trapped. That's when I heard it again. The singing. But this time it was clearer, closer. Multiple voices joining together in harmony. An old song, sad and beautiful and angry all at once. I spun around looking everywhere but saw nothing, just red rocks and empty sky and the same scrub brush that had been there yesterday. But the singing continued, seeming to come from the rocks themselves. I ran back to camp, my backpack bouncing against my spine. The bone knife felt heavier with every step, like it was trying to pull me down into the earth. Back at the canyon, I dumped everything out of my pack and stared at the knife. In the bright sunlight, I could see the carvings more clearly now. They weren't just decorations, they were pictures. Tiny, detailed pictures that told a story. The first image showed people living peacefully by a river. The second showed them burying their dead with ceremony and respect. The third showed strangers, coming, taking things that didn't belong to them. And the fourth showed what happened to the thieves. I dropped the knife like it was on fire. It hit the ground with a sound like breaking glass, even though it was made of bone. That's when I noticed them, scattered around my campsite, half buried in the sand. Small white objects that I'd somehow missed before. Bones, human finger bones to be exact, arranged in a circle around my tent. My mouth went dry. I knelt down and brushed the sand away from one of them. It was old, really old, but there was something wrapped around it, a piece of fabric, modern fabric. I picked up another bone, same thing, and another. Each one had a small piece of cloth tied around it. Pieces of clothing from different time periods. A bit of denim from the 1970s, polyester from the 1980s, cotton from more recent years. These weren't ancient bones. These were the bones of people who had been here recently, people like me. The singing grew louder. I could make out words now, though I didn't understand the language. But somehow, I knew what they were saying. They were calling my name. I grabbed the bone knife and held it tight. Whatever was happening, whatever had brought me here, it wanted this knife back, but I couldn't give it up. This one piece was worth enough to pay off all my debts. Without it, I was finished. The sun was setting again, and I knew the real terror was just beginning. Because now I understood the truth. I wasn't the first artifact hunter to find this place, and unless I figured out what these spirits wanted, I wouldn't be the last. Night fell fast, like someone had turned off a light switch. I built my fire bigger than usual and kept it burning bright. Fire makes you feel safe, even when you know you're not. I tried to eat some canned beans, but my stomach was twisted in knots. Every shadow looked like it was moving. Every sound made me jump. The bone knife sat next to me, wrapped in a cloth, but I could still feel it, like it was watching me. Around midnight, the singing stopped. That's when I knew something bad was about to happen. The silence was worse than the voices had been. At least when they were singing, I knew where they were. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I was waking up to the smell of smoke. But not campfire smoke. This was different, sweet and thick, like burning sage. I opened my eyes and almost screamed. They were standing around my fire, 3 figures in tattered clothes, perfectly still. At first I thought they were just people, maybe other campers who had seen my fire, but then I noticed they weren't casting shadows, and I could see right through them. The one closest to me was wearing a denim jacket and jeans, 1970s style, like something my dad used to wear. The second one had on a windbreaker and hiking boots, modern stuff, maybe from the 1990s. The third was wearing clothes I recognized from just a few years ago, but their faces were all wrong. Hollow cheeks, empty eye sockets, skin stretched tight over bone. They looked like they'd been dead for a very long time. "You took our things," the first one said. His voice sounded like wind through dry leaves. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, could barely breathe. "We came here looking for treasures too," said the second one. "Just like you. But we learned the truth too late," whispered the third. I found my voice, though it came out as a croak. "What truth?" The first one pointed toward the storage caves. "The bones remember everything. Every person who touched them, every sacred prayer said over them, every tear shed when they were buried." "We thought we were just taking old things," said the second one. "Things nobody cared about anymore." "But we were wrong," said the third. So very wrong. I stood up slowly, the bone knife clutched in my hand. "What happened to you?" They all smiled then. Terrible, sad smiles on their dead faces. "The same thing that's happening to you," they said together. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps coming from the darkness beyond my campfire. Something else was coming. Something that wasn't dead yet, but wasn't quite alive either. It stepped into the light, and I saw my death walking toward me. It looked like a person at first glance, tall, with long black hair and dark skin. But as it got closer, I could see the truth. Its arms were too long, its fingers ended in claws, and when it opened its mouth to speak, I saw teeth that belonged to no human. But the worst part was its eyes. They were old, ancient, full of pain and anger that had been building for hundreds of years. "My name is Joseph Running Bear," it said, in a voice like thunder. "I was a medicine man of the Paiute people. I died in 1885, trying to protect our sacred places from men like you." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The canyon walls surrounded me on all sides. "You have taken what does not belong to you," Joseph said. "You have disturbed the rest of our ancestors. You have sold their sacred objects to strangers who hang them on walls like trophies." I needed the money," I stammered. "I had debts. I had no choice." Joseph tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of interesting bug. "There is always a choice. You chose greed over respect. You chose money over honor." The 3 dead men were moving closer now. I could see through their bodies to the rocks behind them, but they felt real enough to hurt me. "What do you want?" I asked. "Justice," Joseph said simply. "For 92 years, I have watched thieves come to this place. I have tried to warn them. I have given them chances to leave, to return what they stole." He gestured to the 3 dead men. Some, like these, ignored the warnings. They chose to stay, to take more, so they became part of the desert, part of the guardians who protect this place. "And now, it's your turn," said the first dead man. "Unless," Joseph said, raising one clawed hand. "Unless what?" I whispered. "Unless you prove you understand. Unless you show respect for what you have taken." He pointed at the bone knife in my hand. That knife was made from the leg bone of my great-grandfather. It was buried with him in 1823. It has been blessed by 7 generations of medicine men. It is not yours to keep. I looked down at the knife. Even in the firelight, it seemed to glow with its own cold light, worth $10,000, maybe more. "If I give it back," I said slowly, "will you let me go?" Joseph smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "The knife is just the beginning. You have taken hundreds of sacred objects. Each one calls out to be returned to its proper place." My heart sank. He was talking about my entire collection. Everything I'd worked for. Everything I needed to pay my debts. "I can't," I said. "If I don't sell these things, dangerous people will come looking for me. They'll hurt me." "And if you don't return them," Joseph said, "I will hurt you. But my hurt will last forever." The fire was getting dimmer. The shadows were growing longer, and in those shadows I could see more figures gathering, dozens of them. All the thieves who had come before me, now serving as eternal guardians of the place they had tried to rob. I had a choice to make. But as I stood there in the dying firelight, surrounded by the dead, I realized I might have waited too long to make it. "I need time to think," I said, backing toward my tent. Joseph nodded slowly. "You have until sunrise, then you choose." The dead men and the shadows melted away like smoke, but I knew they were still watching. I could feel their eyes on me from every dark corner of the canyon. I sat by my dying fire, holding the bone knife, trying to figure out what to do. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it steady. The knife felt warm now, like it had absorbed heat from the flames, or maybe like it was alive. I thought about my debts, $50,000 to some very bad people, the kind who break legs first and ask questions later. If I didn't pay them soon, I'd end up dead anyway. At least if I kept the artifacts, I had a chance. But then I looked around at the canyon walls, at the shadows that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Maybe being dead wasn't the worst thing that could happen to me. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard whispers. Voices speaking in languages I'd never learned, but somehow understood. They were telling me stories. Stories about the people whose bones I'd stolen. A young woman who died in childbirth, buried with the necklace I'd sold last month. A warrior who fell defending his family, laid to rest with the spear point I'd traded for gas money. A child who never got to grow up, given a small pottery bowl to carry into the next world, a bowl that was now sitting in some rich man's living room. Each story made the knife in my hands feel heavier. By the time the first hint of dawn appeared over the canyon rim, I'd made my decision. I would return everything, all of it. I'd find a way to deal with my debts later. Maybe I'd run, change my name, start over somewhere else. I stood up to call out to Joseph, to tell him I would do what he asked. But when I opened my mouth, no. Words came out. I tried again. Nothing. Then I felt it, a cold sensation starting in my feet, creeping up my legs like ice water in my veins. I looked down and gasped. My legs were changing. The skin was becoming pale and thin. I could see the bones underneath, like looking at an X-ray, but these weren't my bones anymore. They were old bones, ancient bones. "No," I whispered. but my voice sounded different, hollow, like it was coming from far away. Joseph appeared beside me, as silent as a shadow. "You waited too long," he said sadly. "The transformation has begun." "What transformation?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "You are becoming one of us, a guardian. Your bones are remembering their true purpose." I looked at my hands. They were pale now, too, the flesh becoming thin and translucent. The bone knife felt like part of me, like it had grown from my own body. "Stop it," I begged. "I'll give everything back, I promise." "The time for promises is over," Joseph said. "But there is still one chance left." Hope flared in my chest. "What chance?" He pointed to the storage caves. "Choose one item, the most precious thing you have stolen. If you can carry it to the sacred burial ground and place it where it belongs, the transformation will stop." I looked toward the caves, then back at Joseph. "But I can barely walk. How can I carry anything?" "The spirits will help you if your heart is truly changed. But you must choose now, and choose wisely. You will only have strength for one trip." Without hesitation, I headed for the caves. I knew which item I had to choose, the bone knife. It was the most valuable, but more than that, it was the most sacred. Joseph's great-grandfather's bone, blessed by 7 generations. But when I tried to put the knife down so I could pick up something else to test my strength, I couldn't. My hand wouldn't let go. The knife had become part of me. "I can't put it down," I said. Joseph nodded. "Then that is your choice. The knife chooses to return home." The cold was spreading up my body now, reaching my chest. My heart was slowing down. Each beat felt like it might be the last. "Where?" I gasped. "Where do I take it?" Joseph pointed deeper into the canyon to a narrow passage I'd never noticed before. "Follow the path of bones. It will lead you to the sacred place." I started walking, or trying to walk. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step was harder than the last. But somehow I kept moving. The path was marked with small white stones that I now realized were bone fragments. They led through twisting passages between towering rock walls. The deeper I went, the stronger I felt, like the spirits really were helping me. But I could also feel time running out. The sun was rising higher, and my body was changing faster. Soon there would be nothing left of David Redfern. Just another guardian, bound to protect this place forever. I had to hurry. I had to make it to the burial ground before it was too late. But as I rounded the next corner, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The path ahead was blocked by dozens of skeletons, all the thieves who had come before me, standing guard over the most sacred place in the canyon. And they were shaking their heads. They weren't going to let me pass. I stood there staring at the wall of skeletons blocking my path. Some were old, their bones yellow and cracked. Others looked newer, still wearing bits of clothing that hadn't rotted away yet. All of them had empty eye sockets that somehow still managed to look angry. "Please," I whispered, "I'm trying to make this right." The skeleton in front, wearing the remains of a cowboy hat, shook his head slowly. He raised one bony finger and pointed back the way I'd come. "You don't understand," I said, my voice getting stronger. "I want to return it. I want to put it back where it belongs." More head shaking, more pointing. They wanted me to leave, but I couldn't leave. The transformation was happening faster. Now, my chest was becoming see-through, and I could feel my heart struggling to beat. If I didn't return the knife soon, I'd become just like them, forever. "I took things that weren't mine," I said to the skeletons. "I know that was wrong. I sold sacred objects for money. I disturbed graves and didn't care whose ancestors I was hurting." Some of the skeletons tilted their heads like they were listening. "But I understand now," I continued. "These aren't just old things. They're pieces of people's lives. They're love and memory and faith, and I stole all of that." The cowboy skeleton lowered his pointing finger. I can't undo what I did, I said, but I can start to make it right. This knife belongs here with Joseph's great-grandfather. It wants to come home. I held up the bone knife. In the morning sunlight filtering down through the canyon, it seemed to glow. The carved symbols on its surface were moving now, telling their story over and over again. The skeletons looked at each other. Some kind of silent conversation was happening between them. Finally, the cowboy skeleton stepped aside. One by one, the others moved away from the path. I walked through them, feeling like I was in a dream. At the end of the passage was a circular clearing surrounded by high stone walls. In the center was a raised platform made of fitted stones, covered with symbols painted in red and white. This was it, the sacred burial ground. Joseph was waiting for me there, but he looked different now. Less scary, more sad, like a man who had been carrying a heavy load for too long. "You made it," he said simply, "barely." I looked down at myself. I was more skeleton than man now. Only my head and hands still looked human, and they were fading fast. "Place the knife on the altar," Joseph said, gesturing to the stone platform. I walked forward on legs that felt like they might crumble at any moment. When I reached the altar, I tried to put the knife down, but again I couldn't let go. "It stuck to me," I said. Joseph nodded. "The knife has been part of my family for 200 years. It knows the difference between someone who gives freely and someone who only gives because they have to." I felt tears running down my face, though I wasn't sure how I could still cry when most of me was already dead. "I don't know how to give freely," I admitted. "I've spent my whole life taking things, taking credit for other people's work, taking artifacts from graves, taking money that wasn't mine to pay for gambling debts. But you're here," Joseph said quietly, "only because I'm scared to die. Maybe, but you walked through an army of angry spirits to get here. You could have turned back at any time. Fear would have told you to run." I thought about that. He was right. I could have run when I first heard the singing. I could have left when my truck was sabotaged. I could have given up when the transformation started, but I hadn't. "I want to do the right thing," I said. "I want to return everything I stole, not because I'm scared, but because it's right." And the moment I said those words, I felt the knife loosen in my hand. I was able to lift it up and place it gently on the altar. As soon as the bone touched the stone, everything changed. The symbols on the altar began to glow. The knife sank into the stone like it was made of water, disappearing completely. A warm wind blew through the clearing, carrying the sound of singing, but this time the voices sounded happy. I looked down at myself. The transformation had stopped. My body was solid again, human again. I was alive. "Thank you," I said to Joseph, but when I turned around, he was gone. They were all gone. The skeletons, the spirits, even the oppressive feeling that had hung over the canyon like a dark cloud. I was alone. It took me 2 days to walk out of the desert. When I finally reached the highway, a trucker picked me up and drove me to the nearest town. I called the police and told them everything, about the artifacts, about the sacred sites, about the Native American graves I'd disturbed. They arrested me, of course. I spent 3 years in prison. The men I owed money to weren't happy, but somehow they never came after me. Maybe word got around that I'd lost everything. Maybe they just forgot about me. When I got out, I went back to school. Not to study archaeology this time, but to learn about Native American culture and history the right way, with respect. Now I work with tribes to return stolen artifacts to their proper homes. I don't make much money, but I sleep better at night than I have in years. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I think I can still hear singing in the wind, but it doesn't scare me anymore. It sounds like forgiveness. The bone knife is still out there, somewhere in that hidden canyon, still protecting the sacred places, still remembering everything, and sometimes I think it remembers me too. not as the thief who stole it, but as the man who finally brought it home. My name is Bobby Lindstrom, and I've been living alone on this frozen lake for 3 winters now. People think I'm crazy for staying out here, 25 miles from the nearest road, but they don't understand. This place needs someone watching over it. I wake up every morning at 6, just like I did when I was a park ranger. The first thing I do is check my weather radio. Static crackles through the small speaker, then a voice cuts through. -32 degrees, winds from the northwest at 15 miles per hour. I write it down in my notebook, just like always. I've filled 4 notebooks with weather reports since I moved here. The old ranger station creaks around me as the wind hits it. The walls are thick logs, built to last, but even they groan when the temperature drops this low. I pull on my ranger jacket, the same green one I wore for 12 years, and grab my ice spear and measuring tape. Outside, the world is white and silent. The lake stretches out in front of me like a frozen ocean, surrounded by tall pine trees heavy with snow. My breath comes out in thick clouds that freeze and fall to the ground like tiny pieces of glass. The cold bites my cheeks, but I'm used to it now. I walk the same path every morning, checking the ice thickness at 5 different spots. The lake is safe when the ice is at least 4 inches thick, but I like to see 8 inches before I trust it completely. Tap, tap, tap goes my spear against the ice. I drill a small hole and measure. 8.5 inches. Good. But at the 3rd spot, something stops me cold. There's a hole in the ice that wasn't here yesterday. It's perfectly round, about 2 feet across, and the edges are smooth like someone cut it with a giant cookie or cutter. The water underneath is black and still. I always mark my test holes with orange flags, but this one has no flag. I kneel down and look closer. The hole is surrounded by 6 smaller holes, each one exactly the same size, arranged in a perfect circle. It looks like a pattern someone drew on paper, not something that happens naturally in a frozen lake. That's weird, I say out loud. My voice sounds small in the big empty space. I've been working around ice for 15 years. Ice doesn't make patterns like this. Ice cracks where it wants to crack, melts where the water moves underneath, but it doesn't make perfect circles. I pull out my notebook and draw what I see. Then I take my measuring tape and check the distances between the holes. Each small hole is exactly 3 feet from the big one in the center. Each small hole is exactly 5 feet from the next one. My hands start shaking, and not from the cold. I stand up and look around the lake. Everything else looks normal. The wind blows snow across the surface in long white streams. A crow calls from somewhere in the trees. My snowmobile sits where I left it yesterday, covered in fresh snow. But those holes, they're not normal. I walk to my 4th and 5th test spots, checking the ice thickness like I always do. Everything seems fine. 8 inches, 9 inches. The ice is solid and safe. When I get back to the station, I make coffee and sit at my small wooden table. I open my notebook and stare at the drawing I made. 7 perfect holes arranged in a pattern that makes no sense. I turn on my weather radio again. Current temperature, -34 degrees. Barometric pressure falling. Expect continued cold with possible snow showers this afternoon. I write it down, but my hand is still shaking a little. Maybe a beaver made those holes, or maybe the current under the ice is stronger in that spot. There has to be a normal reason. But as I sit there drinking my coffee, looking out at the frozen lake through my small window, I can't shake the feeling that something is wrong. Something is different about this place today. The coffee tastes bitter in my mouth, and for the first time in months, I'm not hungry for breakfast. 3 days pass, and I keep checking those holes. Every morning they're still there, perfectly round, perfectly spaced. The ice around them is thick and strong, but those holes never freeze over. That's not how ice works. On Thursday morning, my weather radio starts acting up. I turn it on for my daily report, and instead of the usual voice, I hear static. Then, through the crackling noise, a voice says, Temperature minus 67 degrees. I stopped drinking my coffee. Minus 67. That's impossible. It's cold here, but not that cold. I check my thermometer outside the window. Minus 31 degrees. I turn the radio off and on again. This time, the voice is clearer. Storm warning for Lake Superior. Region. Blizzard conditions expected with winds up to 90 miles per hour. I look outside. The sky is clear blue. No clouds anywhere. The wind is calm. Something is very wrong with my radio. After breakfast, I go to check my food supply. I keep everything in a small shed behind the station. Canned food, dried meat, rice and flour. Enough to last until spring. But when I open the shed door, my heart stops. Half my food is gone. I count everything twice. The cans of soup I bought last month, gone. 3 bags of rice, gone. Most of my dried meat, gone. What's left looks old and smells funny. My hands shake as I pick up a can of beans. The label is faded like it's been sitting here for years, but I bought it fresh just 6 weeks ago. The metal is rusty around the edges. I check the shed door. No signs of animals, no footprints in the snow. The lock is still on tight. Did I eat all that food and forget? I try to remember my meals from the past few days, but my memory feels fuzzy. I remember making breakfast, but I can't remember what I ate. That afternoon, I feel hungry, really hungry. It starts as a small feeling in my stomach, but it grows bigger and bigger until it hurts. I eat a can of soup, but 10 minutes later, I'm hungry again. I eat another can, then some crackers, then some dried fruit. Nothing helps. The hunger just gets worse. By evening, I've eaten more food in 1 day than I usually eat in 3 days. My stomach is full, but I still feel like I'm starving. I try to listen to the weather radio again. Static fills the air, then a voice that sounds far away. Temperatures dropping, food supplies running low, help is not coming. I turn it off fast. That's not a weather report. That sounds like someone talking about me. At night, I lie in bed listening to the sounds outside. The wind whistles through the trees. The ice on the lake makes cracking sounds like someone walking on broken glass. These are normal sounds. I've heard them 100 times. But tonight, mixed in with the wind, I hear something else. Voices, faint and far away, like people calling for help. I sit up in bed and listen hard. The voices sound like they're coming from the lake, from the direction of those strange holes. Hello? I call out, but my voice just echoes back. The voices stop. I tell myself it's just the wind. Wind can sound like voices sometimes. But my heart is beating fast, and I can't fall asleep. When morning comes, I find footprints in the snow around my station. Big footprints, bigger than mine. They start at the edge of the trees and circle my building 3 times before disappearing at the lake's edge. But here's the thing that makes my blood turn cold. The footprints are barefoot. Who walks barefoot in minus 30-degree weather? I follow the footprints to the lake. They lead straight to those strange holes in the ice. At the biggest hole, the footprints just stop, like whoever made them jumped into the black water. But that's crazy. Nobody could survive in that water for even a minute. I kneel down and look into the hole. The water is so dark I can't see the bottom. I drop a small stone into it. I wait for the splash, but I don't hear anything. The stone just disappears into the darkness. How deep is this lake? I've been living here for 3 years and I always thought the lake was maybe 20 feet deep, but this hole seems to go down forever. When I get back to the station, I'm hungry again. That terrible eating me from the inside hungry. I open a can of soup, but when I look at it, something's wrong. The soup is gray and smells like rotten fish. The expiration date says 1978. That can't be right. I bought this food last month. I open another can. Same thing. Gray, smelly, old. I check all my remaining food. Everything is spoiled or expired. Some of the dates go back to the 1970s. My hands are shaking now. I'm getting scared. Really scared. I try to remember shopping for food, driving to town, carrying the bags into my shed. But those memories feel fuzzy, like trying to remember a dream. The hunger is getting worse. It feels like something is eating me from inside. I make some tea to fill my stomach, but it doesn't help. I eat some crackers, but they taste like cardboard and make me feel sick. By afternoon, I'm so hungry I can barely think straight. I keep opening cans and throwing them away because everything is spoiled. The smell makes me want to throw up, but my stomach is so empty it hurts. That's when I remember the old logbooks in the station. The ranger who lived here before me left behind 3 notebooks full of reports. Weather, wildlife, visitor notes, everything that happened on this lake for 20 years. I never read them before, but now I need to know if anything like this has happened before. I find the books on a dusty shelf and start reading. Most of it is boring stuff. Clear skies, ice thickness good, saw 3 deer. But then I find an entry from January 1979 that makes me stop cold. Food keeps spoiling, radio giving wrong reports, found strange holes in ice that won't freeze over, getting very hungry but can't keep anything down, hearing voices at night, think I'm losing my mind. The next entry is 2 days later. Something is in the lake, something that makes you hungry. The old stories were true. The Wendigo is real. If anyone finds this, don't stay here in winter. Leave while you still can. That's the last entry in the book. I sit there staring at the page. Wendigo. I've heard that word before. Some kind of monster from old Native American stories. A creature that makes people so hungry they go crazy. But that's just a story, isn't it? I look out the window at the lake. The sun is setting and the ice looks dark and scary. Those holes are still there, black spots in the white snow like eyes watching me. My stomach makes a loud growling sound. The hunger is so bad now I feel dizzy. I try to eat some bread, but it falls apart in my hands like dust. As darkness comes, I hear the voices again, clearer this time. They sound like people I used to know, people who died. "Bobby," says a voice that sounds like my old partner from the park service. "Bobby, we're so hungry, why didn't you help us?" I cover my ears, but the voices get louder. "You ate while we starved," says another voice. A woman's voice. "You had food and you didn't share." "No," I whisper, "that's not true." But deep down, I know it is true. When I was a ranger, I lost a family of hikers in a blizzard. While I was looking for them, I ate my emergency food, all of it. When we finally found them 3 days later, they were dead, starved to death. I never told anyone that I ate while they died. The voices outside get louder and angrier. They're calling my name, blaming me, telling me I deserve to starve. I close my eyes and try not to listen. But the hunger is so bad now I can barely think. My whole body aches. My stomach feels like it's trying to eat itself. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible thought starts growing. There might be one way to stop the hunger. One thing. I haven't tried yet. I look at my hands in the dim light. The skin looks pale and thin. I wonder what human flesh tastes like. I shake my head hard. What's wrong with me? I can't think things like that. I'm not a monster, but the hunger won't go away. It's been 3 days since I ate anything that stayed in my stomach. I'm getting weak. When I stand up, the room spins around me. I need to get out of here. I need to get to town and find help. I put on my heavy coat and boots. Outside, the cold hits me like a wall. It's colder than it's ever been. My breath freezes before it leaves my mouth. The snow crunches under my feet like broken bones. I walk to where I keep my snowmobile, but when I get there, I stop and stare. The machine is covered in ice, thick white ice that looks like it's been there for months. I try to chip it away with my hands, but it's too thick. It's like the whole snowmobile is frozen solid. This is impossible. I used it just a week ago. I look toward the lake. The ice road that connects to the main highway is there, but it looks different. Cracks run across it like lightning. In some places I can see dark water underneath. The Road is breaking up. Even if I could start my snowmobile, I couldn't drive on that ice. I'm trapped. I walk back to the station, but I don't go inside. Something makes me stop at the door. I turn and look at the lake. There's someone standing on the ice. My heart starts beating fast. The person is tall and thin, standing near those mysterious holes. Too far away to see clearly, but I can tell they're looking at me. "Hello?" I shout. My voice echoes across the empty lake. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The figure doesn't answer. It just stands there perfectly still. I start walking toward the lake. Maybe it's another person who got stranded. Maybe they have food. Maybe they can help me figure out what's happening. But as I get closer, something feels wrong. The person is too tall, too thin, and they're not wearing any clothes. How can someone stand naked in this cold? I stop about 50 feet away. Now I can see the figure more clearly, and what I see makes my blood freeze. It's not a person. The thing is at least 8 feet tall. Its body is so skinny I can see every bone under its grey skin. Its arms hang down to its knees, and its head looks like a deer skull with empty black eye sockets. But the worst part is its smell. Even from 50 feet away I can smell it. It smells like rotten meat and old blood. The thing tilts its head to look at me. When it opens its mouth, breath comes out like white smoke. But it's not just breath. The cold around it gets worse. I can feel it on my face like needles. "Bobby," it says. Its voice sounds like wind through dead trees. "Bobby, you're so hungry. I can't move, I can't breathe. This thing knows my name. I know what you did," it continues. "You ate while they starved. You saved yourself and let them die." "No," I whisper. "Yes." The thing takes a step closer. "You've been hungry ever since. Hungry for forgiveness. Hungry to forget. But you can never forget, can you?" The hunger in my stomach gets worse. It feels like something is clawing at me from inside. "I can make it stop," the thing says. "The hunger, the guilt, all of it. But you have to do something for me first." "What?" The word comes out before I can stop it. The creature smiles, its teeth are yellow and sharp like broken glass. "There are others coming, other people who get lost in storms, other people who think they're safe. You know this lake better than anyone. You could help me find them. I know what it's asking. It wants me to help it hunt people, to help it kill them. And in return," it says, stepping closer, "I'll give you what you need. I'll feed you, really feed you. The hunger will stop forever." I look at this horrible thing and I realize something terrible. Part of me wants to say yes, the hunger is so bad that part of me is ready to do anything to make it stop. "Think about it, Bobby," the creature whispers. "You're going to die anyway. You're already starving. At least this way, your death will mean something. At least this way you won't die alone." It turns and walks back toward the holes in the ice. With each step, it gets harder to see, like it's fading away. "I'll give you until tomorrow night." Its voice floats back to me. "Then you decide. Help me hunt, or starve to death by yourself." Then it's gone. I stand there in the cold, shaking. Not from the weather, but from fear, and from something worse than fear, from temptation, because the terrible truth is, I'm so hungry and so scared that I'm actually thinking about it. I spend the whole night sitting by my window, staring at the lake. The creature is out there somewhere, waiting for my answer. The hunger is so bad now I can't think straight. My hands shake all the time. My vision goes blurry. I try to drink water, but even that makes my stomach hurt. I keep thinking about what the thing said. "You're going to die anyway." It's probably right. I'm trapped here with no food and no way out. The ice road is breaking up. My snowmobile is frozen solid. Even if I tried to walk to town, I'd never make it 25 miles in this cold. I'm going to starve to death. But do I want to become a monster first? In the morning, I find my old ranger handbook, the one they gave me when I first started working for the Park Service. I flip through the pages until I find what I'm looking for. Ranger Code of Ethics. A ranger's first duty is to protect and serve the public. A ranger puts the safety of others before his own safety. A ranger never abandons his post. I read those words over and over. That's who I used to be. Someone who helped people. Someone who saved lives. But I also remember that family of hikers, how I failed them, how I ate my food while they starved in the cold. Maybe I deserve this. Maybe this is my punishment. By afternoon, I'm so weak I can barely stand. I lie on my bed and close my eyes. The hunger feels like fire in my belly. That's when I hear voices outside again. But this time, they sound different. Real. I look out the window and see two people walking across the lake. A man and a woman, both wearing heavy winter coats. They're heading toward my station. My heart starts beating fast. Real people, living people. I watch them get closer. They look tired and cold. The woman is limping. The man keeps looking around like he's lost. They need help. But then I realize something horrible. This is exactly what the creature was talking about. People who get lost. People who need help. If I help them, they'll be safe, but I'll still starve. If I call to the creature, it will come, it will feed on them, and it will keep its promise to me. The two people are getting closer. They'll be at my door in a few minutes. I have to choose. Right now, I think about the ranger I used to be, the man who was supposed to protect people, the man who failed once before. I think about the family of hikers who died because I wasn't good enough, because I was selfish. I won't fail again. I open my door and wave to the two people. "Over here," I shout. "You're safe now." They smile and wave back. They start walking faster toward me. Behind them, far out on the lake, I see a tall, thin shadow moving between the ice holes. The creature is coming. It knows there are people here, but I made my choice. I grab the emergency flare gun from my shelf. It's the only weapon I have. When the two people reach my door, I let them inside and lock it tight. "Thank God," the woman says. "We've been lost for hours. Our car broke down on the highway." "You'll be okay," I tell them, "but we need to stay inside. There's something dangerous out there." Ooh. Through the window, I can see the creature getting closer. It's moving fast now, angry that I chose to help instead of hunt. The flare gun only has 2 shots. The creature is bigger and stronger than me. I'm weak from hunger. I probably won't win this fight, but that's okay. I'm a ranger. This is what rangers do. The creature reaches my door and starts pounding on it. The whole building shakes. The man and woman huddle together, terrified. "What is that?" the man whispers. "Something hungry," I say, "but it's not getting you, I promise." The door explodes. Inward, the creature fills the doorway, its deer skull head scraping the ceiling. It looks at the two people, then at me. "You chose wrong, Bobby," it says. "No," I say, raising the flare gun. "For once in my life, I chose right." I pull the trigger. The flare hits the creature in the chest and explodes in bright red fire. The thing screams and stumbles backward. Fire spreads across its body. It's working. The creature is burning, but it's not dead. It comes at me again, flames and all. I fire my second shot. This one hits it in the head. The deer skull cracks and catches fire. The creature falls backward through the doorway and onto the snow outside. The fire spreads bigger and brighter. The thing screams one more time, then goes quiet. I collapse on the floor. I'm so weak I can barely move. The man helps me sit up. "Are you okay? What was that thing?" I look outside. The creature's body is gone, only a black burn mark in the snow. But the strange holes in the lake are gone too. The ice is smooth and normal. "Something that's been hungry for a very long time," I say. The woman checks our supplies. She finds some food in her backpack, energy bars and bottled water. Not much, but enough. When I eat the energy bar, it actually tastes good. It stays in my stomach. The terrible hunger finally starts to go away. 3 days later, the ice road freezes. solid again. We're able to walk to the highway and get help. I never went back to that lake. I got a job in town, working at a small store. Normal work, safe work. But sometimes, on really cold winter nights, I still think about that creature, about the choice I had to make. I wonder if there are other lakes out there, other places where hungry things wait in the dark. And I wonder if there are other people who might have to choose between saving themselves or saving others. I hope they choose better than I did the first time. I hope they remember that being human means putting others first, even when you're afraid, even when you're hungry, even when you're alone. My name is Jackson Whitmore, but everyone who knew me called me Jack. I say knew me because there ain't many folks left who remember my name these days. I live alone up on Gallows Ridge, about 15 miles from the nearest town, in what used to be a coal mine. I wake up every morning at 5, just like I did when I worked in the mines. Old habits die hard, I guess. The sun was just starting to peek over the mountains when I rolled out of my cot that Tuesday morning. My left hand, the one missing 3 fingers, was aching something fierce. It always did when the weather was about to change. I made my way into the old mine shaft where I keep my still. That's how I make my living now, cooking moonshine. Been doing it for 3 years, ever since the mine closed down and left us all with nothing. The work keeps my hands busy and my mind off things I'd rather not think about. The morning air was crisp and clean, not like the dusty hell we used to breathe down in the tunnels. I could hear the wind whistling through the old mining equipment, scattered around the ridge. Rusty conveyor belts and broken wheelbarrows, all covered in moss now. Sometimes I talk to my brother Tommy while I work. He died in that cave-in 5 years ago, but talking to him makes the loneliness easier to bear. "Morning, Tommy," I said to the empty air as I checked my still. "Looks like it's going to be a good day for cooking." That's when I saw it. About 20 yards from my dwelling, there was a deer skeleton. But it wasn't just lying there natural-like. Someone had arranged the bones in a perfect circle, with the skull pointing toward my mine shaft. Every bone was clean and white, arranged neat as you please. I stood there staring at it, my heart beating a little faster. In all my years on this mountain, I'd never seen anything like it. Animals don't arrange bones, people do. But there weren't supposed to be any people up here except me. I walked closer to get a better look. The bones were completely clean, no meat, no smell, nothing. They looked like they'd been sitting in the sun for months, but I would have noticed a dead deer that close to my home. I check this area every single day when I make my rounds. My grandmother used to tell me stories about this mountain when I was little. She said there were things living in these hills that were older than the coal, older than the Cherokee who used to hunt here. I always figured they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off. But standing there, looking at those bones arranged in that perfect circle, I felt something cold crawl up my spine. I kicked the bones apart and scattered them into the woods. Probably just some kids playing pranks, I told myself. Though how kids would get up here without me seeing them was beyond me. The only road up the mountain passed right by my place. The rest of the morning went normal enough. I tended to my still, checked the mash, and made sure everything was running smooth, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. Every time I looked up at the tree line, I expected to see someone standing there, but there was never anyone. By noon, I'd almost forgotten about the bones. Almost. But as I was heading back to my dwelling for lunch, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My journal was sitting on the wooden crate I use as a table, but I knew for certain I'd left it inside, next to my cot. I always keep it inside. Rain ruins paper, and that journal has 3 years of weather patterns and still recipes that I can't afford to lose. I picked it up with shaking hands and flipped through the pages. Everything looked normal until I got to yesterday's entry. Below my own writing, in what looked like my own handwriting, were words I'd never written. The bones. Remember, the mountain calls them home. I stared at those words until my eyes burned. That was my handwriting, sure enough. Same slant, same way I dot my I's, but I had no memory of writing those words. No memory at all. I couldn't eat lunch after seeing that journal entry. My stomach felt like it was tied up in knots. I kept staring at those words. The bones remember. The mountain calls them home. What did it mean? And why couldn't I remember writing it? I tried to think back to yesterday evening. I remembered eating beans from a can. I remembered checking my still one last time before dark. I remembered writing down the weather, clear skies, temperature dropping. But after that, everything was fuzzy. Maybe I'd had too much of my own moonshine. Sometimes when the loneliness got real bad, I'd take a sip or two. It helped quiet Tommy's voice in my head. But I never drank enough to forget things. Never. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept my oil lamp burning low and listened to the mountain sounds outside. Normally I found them peaceful. The wind through the trees, the old metal creaking, the distant hoot of an owl. But tonight, something was different. Around midnight I heard it, a sound like machinery starting up, coming from deep inside the mountain. It was a low rumble, like the old conveyor belts we used to run in the mine. But that was impossible. There was no power up here, no electricity. The mine had been dead for years. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The sound was definitely coming from the main shaft about 100 yards down the ridge. It would start up for a few seconds, then stop, then start again. Just old metal settling, I whispered to myself. But my voice sounded small in the dark. I walked toward the sound, my flashlight cutting through the blackness. The main shaft entrance was blocked off with warning signs and wooden boards. But the sound was definitely coming from behind those boards. Metal grinding against metal, like ghost machines working in the dark. I pressed my ear against the wood. The sound stopped. Complete silence. I waited for 5 minutes, but it didn't start again. When I turned to walk back, I heard something that made my heart nearly stop. Tommy's voice, calling my name from inside. The mine. Jack, Jack, where are you? I'm stuck, Jack, can't move my legs. I knew it wasn't real. Tommy had been dead for 5 years. I saw them pull his body out of the cave-in myself. But the voice sounded exactly like him. Scared and hurt, just like that terrible day. Tommy? I called back, feeling foolish. Silence. Then, after a long moment, a different sound. Footsteps. Slow, heavy footsteps walking deeper into the mine, away from me. I ran back to my dwelling and locked the door, locked it with the old bolt I'd installed when I first moved up here. I sat on my cot with my hunting rifle across my knees and waited for morning. The next day, I checked my journal again. Another entry I didn't remember writing. He calls for me. He needs help. I should go to him. My hands were shaking as I read it. The handwriting was mine, but the letters looked shaky, like someone had been guiding my hand while I was half asleep. I tried to make sense of it all. Maybe the isolation was getting to me worse than I thought. 3 years alone on this mountain, talking to my dead brother, drinking moonshine when the sadness got too heavy. Maybe my mind was starting to crack. But that afternoon, I found something that proved I wasn't going crazy. I was checking the area around my still when I saw them. Footprints in the soft dirt near the creek. They started out looking normal, like work boots, size 10 or 11, just like mine. But as they moved toward the mine shaft, they changed. The heel marks got longer, deeper. And at the front of each print, instead of a toe mark, there were 2 deep holes in the dirt, like something with split toes, like hooves. I followed the tracks as far as I dared. They led right up to the boarded entrance of the main shaft, then disappeared. But on one of the wooden boards, about 8 feet, off the ground, there were scratch marks, deep gouges in the wood, like something with claws had tried to tear its way through. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat by my window with my rifle and watched the mine entrance. Around 2 in the morning, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. A shadow moved across the mouth of the shaft. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and it didn't walk right. It moved with a strange, jerky gait, like its legs were built wrong. I blinked, and it was gone. But in the morning there was a new entry in my journal. Soon, very soon now, I decided I needed to get off this mountain. Whatever was happening to me, whether it was my mind breaking down or something worse, I needed help, real help, from real people. I packed my truck that morning with the essentials, some clothes, my rifle, and enough moonshine to trade for supplies in town. I figured I'd stay with my cousin Pete for a few days, clear my head, maybe see a doctor about the memory and problems. But when I drove down to where the mountain road meets the main path, my heart sank. A huge pile of rocks blocked the way completely. Must have been a rock slide during the night. Boulders bigger than my truck were scattered across the road like toys. I got out and walked around the pile. There was no way through. Some of those rocks weighed tons. It would take a crew with heavy equipment days to clear it. And the strange thing was, I hadn't heard anything during the night. No rumbling, no crashing sounds, nothing. I hiked back up to my place feeling trapped. The mountain had me now, whether I wanted to stay or not. That's when the real trouble started. I woke up the next morning and couldn't feel my left arm. Not the fingers I'd lost in the mining accident. The whole arm. It just hung there like a piece of meat. When I looked down at it, I nearly screamed. My skin had gone pale, almost see-through. I could see the outline of my arm bone underneath, like looking at an X-ray. The bone looked thin, fragile, like it might snap if I moved wrong. I tried to move my fingers, but nothing happened. I pinched the skin on my arm and felt nothing. It was like the arm belonged to someone else. By afternoon, the feeling started coming back, but it was wrong. Everything ached deep inside, like the bone itself was sore, and when I touched my arm, it felt soft in places where it should be hard. That evening, I found more footprints. This time they were right outside my door. Human feet that slowly changed to hooves as they circled my dwelling. Around and around, like something had been walking in circles, watching me sleep. The prints were deep in some places, shallow in others. Like whatever made them was heavy sometimes and light other times. And there were so many of them. It must have walked around my place for hours. I followed the tracks to the creek. They went right up to the water's edge, then stopped. On the other side of the creek, about 10 feet away, they started again. But there were no prints in the water, no splash marks on the muddy bank. Whatever it was had just jumped across. That night I barricaded my door with everything I could move. My table, some wooden crates, even my spare water barrels. I sat in the corner with my rifle and waited. Around midnight, I heard it outside. Footsteps circling my dwelling again, slow and steady, like it had all the time in the world. Every now and then, the steps would stop, and I'd hear a sniffing sound, like a dog trying to catch a scent. Then it spoke. "Jack," it said in Tommy's voice. "Jack, I'm hurt. My legs are broken. I can't get out." I knew it wasn't Tommy. I knew it. But the voice was perfect. Every word sounded exactly like my brother. "Please, Jack. It's so dark down here. I've been calling for you for days." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the rifle. Part of me wanted to open that door. The part that still felt guilty about leaving Tommy behind in the cave-in. The part that heard his voice calling for help and wanted to run to him, just like I should have 5 years ago. "I know you're in there, Jack. I can smell you." That's when I knew for sure it wasn't Tommy. My brother never talked like that, never sounded so hungry. The footsteps moved away from my door and stopped at my window. I could see a shadow through the boards I'd nailed over the glass, tall and thin, with something wrong about the shape of its head. "Jack," it whispered. "Look at me, Jack." I kept my eyes on my rifle and didn't look up. I sat there until dawn, listening to it move around outside. Sometimes it would scratch at the walls with what sounded like long fingernails. Sometimes it would make a sound like laughing, but not quite human. When the sun came up, it left. But on my door, carved deep into the wood, were words, Your bones are calling to me. And when I checked my journal that morning, there was a new entry in my shaky handwriting. I hear him clearly now. He's waiting for me in the deep places. Soon I'll go to him. Soon I'll understand what the bones are trying to tell me. I stared at those words, and for the first time since this all started, I felt real fear. Not just worry or confusion, real, bone-deep terror, because I was starting to remember writing them. The attacks on my bones got worse every night. I'd wake up and find different parts of my body weak and see-through. First my arm, then my ribs, then my legs. It was like something was slowly draining the strength right out of my skeleton. My left hand, the one already missing 3 fingers, was the worst. The remaining fingers started bending in ways they shouldn't. When I tried to make a fist, I could hear tiny cracking sounds like twigs breaking. The pain was deep and constant, like someone was squeezing my bones from the inside. During the day, I felt almost normal. The weakness would fade, and my skin would look regular again. But I knew it was getting worse each time. Whatever was doing this to me was getting stronger. That's when I started hearing Tommy's voice during the daylight hours. "Jack, come find me." His voice would echo from the mine shafts. "I'm lost down here. I can't see anything." I tried to ignore it, but the voice was so real, so much like my brother, and it always came from a different shaft, like he was moving around down there in the dark. "Remember when we used to explore these tunnels as kids?" the voice would say. "Remember how we promised we'd always look out for each other?" That hurt the most, because it was true. We had made that promise, and I'd broken it the day of the cave-in. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the voice. It was coming from shaft number 7, about halfway down the ridge. The entrance was partly collapsed, but there was still a gap big enough for a man to squeeze through. "Tommy!" I called into the darkness. "Jack! You came! I'm down here, but I'm stuck. My legs are pinned under some rocks." I started to climb. Through the gap, then stopped. Something wasn't right. Tommy had died in shaft number 3, not 7. And his voice was echoing in a funny way, like it was coming from really deep underground. I backed away from the entrance. "Jack, where are you going? Don't leave me again." The voice was getting angry now. Less like Tommy, and more like something, trying to sound like Tommy. That night I woke up to the sound of metal clanging in the distance. I looked out my window and saw lights moving around the old mining equipment. Yellow lights, like the kind on hard hats. I grabbed my rifle and crept outside. As I got closer, I could see men working around the old conveyor belt. They wore mining helmets and work clothes, just like in the old days. They were loading something onto the belt, but I couldn't tell what. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey, who are you?" They all stopped and turned toward me. That's when I saw their faces in the lamplight. Their faces were wrong, too pale, with dark holes where their eyes should be, and they were smiling with too many teeth. One of them pointed at me and said something to the others. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear them laughing. It sounded like wind blowing through broken glass. I raised my rifle, but they were already gone, just vanished, like they'd never been there. But the conveyor belt was still moving, carrying nothing but air. I ran back to my dwelling and locked the door. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the bolt. The next morning, I went to check on the mining equipment. The conveyor belt was old and rusted, with plants growing through it. It hadn't run in years, but in the dirt around it there were fresh boot prints, dozens of them, and something else. Scattered around the belt were small white objects. When I looked closer, I realized what they were. Teeth. Human teeth. Some still had bits of root attached. I was gathering them up to throw away when I found something that made my stomach turn. One of the teeth was mine. A back molar I'd had pulled 3 years ago in town. I recognized the gold filling, but that tooth was buried in my old backyard, 50 miles away. That's when I knew for sure. Whatever was on this mountain, it wasn't just after me. It had been collecting things, collecting pieces of people who used to live here. maybe for years, maybe for decades. I ran back to my dwelling and started looking through the old mining records I kept. Lists of men who died in accidents, families who'd moved away when the mine closed. As I read through the names, I started to recognize some of them. The voices I'd been hearing weren't just Tommy's voice, they were all of them, every man who died in these tunnels. And something was using their voices to call to me. That night, the attacks got worse. I woke up and couldn't move my legs at all. They felt like wet clay, soft and shapeless. When I tried to stand, I fell right to the floor. Through my window, I could see a tall shadow standing by the mine entrance. It was just standing there, watching my dwelling, waiting, and in my journal. The next morning, written in handwriting that was almost my own, but not quite, "Tomorrow night, the deep shaft. Come alone, or I'll take your bones piece by piece while you watch." I spent the whole day trying to figure out what I was dealing with. I read through every old newspaper clipping and mining report I could find. The stories all had the same pattern. Men going missing, strange accidents, people hearing voices from empty mine shafts. But one story caught my attention. It was from 1923, about a creature the local Cherokee had warned the mining company about. They called it the Bone Thief. They said it lived deep underground and fed on the calcium in human bones. The mining company ignored the warnings and dug deeper anyway. The article said the creature looked like a man, but wrong. Too tall, with legs like a goat and teeth that could crack bones like nuts. It could mimic any voice it had ever heard, and it was smart enough to hunt people slowly, wearing them down until they were too weak to fight back. That explained everything. The voices, the bone weakness, even why my own tooth had shown up here. This thing had been collecting pieces of everyone who'd ever lived on this mountain. By evening, I could barely walk. My legs felt like they were made of rubber. When I touched my ribs, they bent inward like they were made of soft clay. Every step sent shooting pains through my whole body, but I still had one advantage. I knew these mines better than anyone alive. I'd worked in them for 15 years before the accident. I knew every tunnel, every shaft, every place where the rock was weak. I gathered up every piece of iron I could find, old pickaxes, railroad spikes, even nails from broken equipment. My grandmother used to say iron could hurt things that weren't natural. It was worth a try. As the sun went down, I heard the voice calling from the deepest shaft, the one we called Devil's Throat, because it went down so far, nobody had ever found the bottom. "Jack," Tommy's voice echoed up from the darkness. "It's time, brother. Come home." But this time I heard something else in the voice, something hungry and old and not human at all. I strapped my flashlight to my head and filled my pockets with iron pieces. My rifle wouldn't do much good in the tight tunnels, so I took my old mining hammer instead. It was made of solid iron and had served me well in the old days. The entrance to Devil's Throat was wide enough for the old mining carts. I'd been down there many times when I was younger, but never to the very bottom. The shaft went down at a steep angle for about 200 feet, then dropped straight down into nothing. As I started walking down the tunnel, my flashlight beam bounced off the walls. The rock here was different from the other shafts. Older, it had a strange white color, like it was made of crushed bones. "That's right, Jack," the voice called from ahead. "Come down to me. We have so much to talk about." The voice was changing. As I got deeper, it still sounded like Tommy, but there were other voices mixed in now. Men I'd worked with, friends who died in accidents, even my father's voice from when I was a kid. "Remember the cave-in, Jack," my father's voice said. "Remember how you ran instead of helping your brother?" That stopped me cold. My father had been dead for 10 years. He couldn't know about what happened to Tommy. "You left him to die," another voice said. This one sounded like my old boss from the mine. "You heard him calling for help, but you saved yourself instead." "That's not true," I said out loud, but my voice sounded small in the tunnel. isn't it? Now it was Tommy's voice. Again, but colder than before. You heard the rocks falling. You knew I was trapped, but you ran anyway. I kept walking deeper, even though every step hurt. The iron pieces in my pockets felt heavy, but also comforting, like they might actually help when the time came. The tunnel started to open up ahead. My flashlight beam hit a large cavern, bigger than anything I'd ever seen in these mines. The walls were covered in white patches that looked like they were glowing in the light. That's when I saw them. Bones, thousands and thousands of bones, arranged in neat piles along the walls. Human bones, animal bones, all sorted by size and type. Some of them were yellow with age, others looked fresh, and in the center of the cavern, sitting on a throne made of rib cages and skulls, was the thing that had been hunting me. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, with a human chest and arms but legs like a goat. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over its bones. When it smiled at me, I could see rows of teeth that looked like they belonged to different animals. Some sharp like a cat's, others flat like a horse's. "Hello, Jack," it said in Tommy's voice. "I've been waiting for you." The creature stood up from its throne of bones, and I could hear my own skeleton creaking like old floorboards. Just being near. This thing was making my bones weaker by the second. "You're not Tommy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," it replied, and now its voice sounded like nothing human, like wind blowing through a graveyard. But I knew Tommy. I tasted his bones the day he died. Sweet calcium, rich marrow. He called for you, Jack. Called and called until his voice gave out. I felt my legs getting softer, like they might give out any second, but I also felt something else. Anger, real anger, burning hot in my chest. "You weren't there," I said. "You don't know what happened." The creature laughed, and the sound made my teeth ache. "I was there, Jack. I'm always there when men die in my mountain. I felt his terror when the rocks fell. I heard him say your name with his last breath." It started walking toward me, and with each step, I could feel my bones getting weaker. The iron pieces in my pockets felt heavier, pulling me down. "The cave-in wasn't an accident," the creature said. "I caused it. I wanted Tommy's bones. But you ran. You left your brother for me." "I tried to get help," I whispered, but even I didn't believe it anymore. "You ran because you were scared, just like you're scared now." The creature was only 10 feet away now. I could smell it, like old bones and deep earth. My ribs were bending inward with each breath. Soon, I wouldn't be able to stand at all. But then I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Iron hurts things that aren't natural. And this creature, whatever it was, definitely wasn't natural. I pulled out the biggest piece of iron I had, an old railroad spike about 8 inches long. The creature stopped walking when it saw the metal. "Iron," it hissed. "Clever boy, but you're too weak now. Your bones are like wet paper. You can barely hold that spike." It was right. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely grip the iron, but I held on. "Even if you hurt me," the creature said, "you'll never leave this mountain. Your bones belong to me now. I've been taking them piece by piece for days." That's when I realized something. This thing was smart, but it didn't know everything about mining. It didn't know about the old dynamite we used to keep in the deep shafts. And it didn't know that Devil's Throat had weak spots in the ceiling where the rock was cracked. I started backing toward the far wall of the cavern where I could see the old mining equipment. The creature followed me, getting closer with each step. "There's nowhere to run, Jack. This is my home. These are my tunnels now." But I wasn't running. I was looking for the old blasting box we used to use for controlled explosions. If it was still here, if it still worked, there it was, covered in dust behind a pile of bones. The wires were still connected to charges placed in the ceiling cracks, left over from when the mining company abandoned this shaft. The creature was right behind me now. I could feel its breath on my neck, cold and smelling like death. My legs finally gave out, and I fell to my knees. "Now," it whispered in Tommy's voice, "you can join your brother." I felt its claws touch my spine, and pain shot through my whole body. My bones started to dissolve, turning soft and useless. But with the last bit of strength I had, I jammed the iron spike into the creature's leg and pushed the plunger on the blasting box. The creature screamed, a sound like breaking glass and tearing metal. The iron spike burned into its flesh like a hot poker, but more importantly, the ceiling started to shake. Rock and dust rained down as the old charges exploded in sequence. The creature looked up just as the first big boulder fell. It tried to move, but the iron spike in its leg had weakened it just enough. The cavern collapsed in sections, starting from the back and moving forward. I crawled toward the tunnel entrance as fast as I could, my bones slowly getting stronger as I got farther from the creature. Behind me I could hear it screaming as tons of rock came down. The screams got fainter and fainter until they stopped completely. I made it to the tunnel just as the last section of ceiling fell. The entrance to the cavern was completely blocked now, sealed by thousands of tons of stone. It took me 3 hours to crawl back up to the surface. By the time I reached the top, I could walk again. My bones were still sore, but they were solid, real. The next morning, the rock slide blocking the road was gone. Just gone, like it had. Never been there. I packed my truck and drove down the mountain without looking back. I never returned to Gallows Ridge. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear Tommy's voice calling my name. Not the creature's version of his voice, but the real Tommy. And when I hear him, he sounds peaceful, like he's finally free. I live in town now, in a small apartment above the hardware store. People think I'm crazy when I tell them about iron keeping evil things away, but I keep iron nails in my pockets anyway, just in case, because deep down, I know the truth. There are things in this world that are older and hungrier than we can imagine, and sometimes they wake up, but iron still hurts them, and sometimes that's enough. My name is Walter Kozlowski, but most folks just called me Walt, though I guess it don't matter much what they called me, since I ain't seen another person in near 3 years now. I live up in these Arkansas mountains, in a cabin I built with my own 2 hands back in 1953. People might think I'm crazy for living alone up here, but they don't know what I know. They don't know what it's like to watch a good man die while you stand there doing nothing. They don't know the sound a man makes when his skull gets cracked open with a pipe wrench in a Chicago slaughterhouse. I was different back then. Had a job cutting meat for Swift & Company, made good money too. But money don't mean much when you can't sleep at night. When you close your eyes and see Jimmy O'Brien's face, blood running down his forehead, looking right at you as those company men beat him to death. Jimmy was trying to get us workers better pay, safer conditions, and I was supposed to tell the police what I saw. But I didn't. I was too scared, too worried about losing my job, my apartment, my whole life in the city. So I packed up everything. I owned and drove south until I found this hollow in the Ozark Mountains where nobody would ever find me. My cabin sits in a little valley surrounded by thick woods. The nearest road is 20 miles away, and even that's just a dirt path that ain't been used since the logging company left years ago. I got everything I need here, a good well for water, a garden for vegetables, and plenty of animals in these woods for meat. I built myself a proper smokehouse too, just like my daddy taught me back in Poland when I was a boy. Stone foundation, wooden walls with good gaps for air, and a roof that keeps the rain out but lets the smoke escape. Next to it, I got my processing shed where I do all my butchering work. Every morning, I wake up before sunrise and check my traps. Rabbit, squirrel, sometimes a possum if I'm lucky. Twice a month, I take my rifle, I call her Mary, after my sister back in Chicago, and hunt for deer. The woods are full of them, and they don't run when they see me anymore. I think they know I only take what I need. When I kill an animal, I always talk to it first. I tell it I'm sorry, that I respect what it's giving me, that I won't waste any part of it. Some might think that's strange, but it feels right. Everything deserves respect, even in death. I got my system down perfect now. Kill clean, bleed proper, skin careful, cut precise. Every piece of meat gets used. Steaks and roasts for eating fresh, strips for jerky, bones for soup, fat for cooking. Nothing goes to waste, not ever. My processing shed is organized just how I like it. Sharp knives hung on the wall in order from biggest to smallest. My old butcher's cleaver from Chicago sits in the place of honor, still cuts clean as the day. I bought it. Wooden cutting boards scrubbed white, metal hooks hanging from the ceiling beams, and a big drain in the floor for washing everything down. I keep records too, written in a notebook with dates and details. October 15th, 8-point. Buck clean shot to the heart, 150 pounds dressed weight. November 2nd, 2 rabbits from snare line made stew. It helps me keep track of what I got stored and what I need for winter. The smokehouse is where the real magic happens. I cure hams and bacon, make jerky that keeps for months, smoke fish. I catch from the creek. The smell of hickory and oak smoke mixing with curing meat, that's the smell of security. That's the smell of knowing I won't starve when the snow comes. Winter up here is serious business. Snow can pile up 6 feet deep, and the cold will kill you if you ain't prepared. But I am prepared. Always. My cabin's got thick walls and a stone fireplace. My root cellar stays cool enough to keep fresh meat, and my smokehouse is full of preserved food. I even learned to make moonshine from old Jim Cartwright before he died. Not because I'm a drinking man, but because it's useful for cleaning wounds and preserving things. Plus, it keeps the loneliness away on the coldest nights when the wind howls through the trees and makes sounds like voices calling. People back in Chicago used to ask me what I'd do if I got hurt or sick up here all alone. Truth is, I'd rather die in these mountains than live another day in that city. Here, I know what I am. I'm a man who takes care of himself, who respects the land and the animals that feed him. I'm not the coward who let Jimmy O'Brien die. Every month I write a letter and drive to the nearest town to mail it. Inside is money, $20 cash, addressed to Mrs. Catherine O'Brien in Chicago. I never sign my name, never write a note, but she knows it's from someone who remembers her husband, someone who's sorry. That money comes from selling pelts and furs to traders who pass through town. Fox, raccoon, beaver when I can get them. It ain't much, but it's something. It's the only way I know to say I'm sorry for being afraid. 3 years I've been living this way, and it's been good years. Quiet years. Safe years. My hand stopped. Shaking, my nightmares got less frequent, and I started sleeping through the night again. I thought maybe I'd found peace in these mountains. I was wrong about that. The first strange thing happened on a Tuesday morning in November. I remember it was Tuesday because that's the day I always check my trap lines on the North Ridge. The air was crisp and cold, frost covering everything like white paint. My breath made little clouds as I walked through the trees. I found a deer by the big oak tree near Miller's Creek. A young doe, maybe 2 years old. But here's the thing, she was already dead and cleaned, cut up neat and proper, just like I would do it myself. Better than I would do it, actually. Someone had hung the quarters from tree branches, wrapped them in clean white cloth. The hide was stretched between 2 saplings, scraped clean and ready for tanning. Even the bones were stacked in a tidy pile, sorted by size. I stood there for a long time, just staring. My heart was beating fast and my hands felt cold even inside my gloves. Who could have done this? And why leave perfectly good meat just hanging there? The nearest person lived 20 miles away. Nobody came up here, not ever. The old logging roads were grown over with brush and fallen trees. A truck couldn't make it halfway up the mountain, and it would take a man all day to hike in on foot. But somebody had been here. Somebody who knew how to process a deer better than most butchers I'd worked with in Chicago. I looked around for footprints, broken branches, any sign of who might have done this. The ground was too hard and rocky to show tracks clearly. I did find some bent grass near where they'd worked, but nothing that told me much. Part of me wanted to take the meat. It was good meat, and winter was coming, but something about it felt wrong. Like maybe it was meant for someone else, or maybe it was some kind of test. I left it hanging there and went home, but I couldn't stop thinking about it all day. 2 days later, I found another one. This time, it was a wild pig, maybe 40 pounds. Same thing, perfectly cleaned and cut, hung up neat and tidy. The person had even made fresh sausage and hung it in little cloth bags to dry. Professional work, the kind you'd see in a real butcher shop. This one was closer to my cabin, maybe half a mile away. Close enough that I should have heard the work being done if I'd been paying attention, but I hadn't heard nothing. No gunshot, no sounds of cutting or chopping, nothing at all. I started checking that spot every day. The meat stayed there for 3 days. Then it was gone. Not taken down and carried away. Just gone. No bones, no scraps, no sign anything had ever been there at all. That's when I started getting nervous. I began staying up later at night, listening. These mountains are never really quiet. Always got owls hooting, branches creaking, small animals moving through the brush. But now I was hearing other things, sounds that didn't quite fit. Metal clanking like someone dropping tools. A steady, grinding noise that reminded me of the big saws we used at the Swift plant. Sometimes I'd hear what sounded like a motor running, but when I'd go outside to look, everything would be quiet again. My nearest neighbor, if you could call him that, was old Pete Ramsey, who lived down near the main road. I decided to drive down and ask if he'd seen anybody new in the area. But when I got to his place, Pete said he hadn't seen a soul in weeks, said the cold weather kept most folks close to home. "You sure you ain't just hearing things, Walt?" he asked me. "Man lives alone too long. Sometimes his mind starts playing tricks." Maybe he was right. Maybe 3 years of talking to nobody but myself was making me imagine things. But when I got back to my cabin that evening, I found something that wasn't in my imagination. My smokehouse door was open. I always keep that door locked tight. Got a good heavy padlock on it to keep bears and other animals out of my meat. But there it was, hanging open like someone had just walked right in. I grabbed my rifle and went to check inside. Everything looked normal at first. My hams hanging where I'd left them, strips of jerky on the drying racks, salt-cured bacon wrapped in cloth. But then I noticed something odd. The meat was arranged different. Not random like I usually left it, but organized, sorted by type and size. The jerky strips were all hanging the same length, spaced exactly even. The hams were turned the same direction. Even my tools were lined up neat and straight on the workbench. It looked like someone had spent hours cleaning and organizing my smokehouse, making everything perfect. My hands started shaking as I looked around. This wasn't random. Someone had been in here, touching my food, moving my things around. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. I checked the lock. No scratches, no sign it had been forced. But it was definitely locked when I left that morning. I remembered checking it twice before heading to town. That night, I moved my rifle next to my bed and barely slept at all. Every little sound made me jump. The wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. A branch tapping against my roof sounded like someone knocking. Around 3 in the morning, I heard that grinding sound again. This time it was closer, maybe coming from behind my cabin near the processing shed. I got up real quiet and looked out the back window. There was a light moving around out there, not a flashlight, too steady and bright, more like the electric lights we had at the meat plant. I could see shadows moving around in the light, but I couldn't make out what was casting them. I grabbed my rifle and crept to the back door. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I turned the door handle real slow and eased it open just a crack. The light was gone. Everything was dark and quiet again. But in the morning I found more meat. This time it was hanging right from the hooks in my own processing shed. 3 rabbits, cleaned and skinned perfect, dangling from my ceiling like I'd put them there myself. The strangest part was, they were still warm. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that, just sat in my chair by the window with Mary across my lap, watching and waiting. My eyes felt scratchy and sore, but every time I tried to close them, I'd hear something outside, or think I did. On the third night, the snow started falling. Big, heavy flakes that stuck to everything and muffled all the normal forest sounds. By morning, there was already 6 inches on the ground, and it kept coming down. This was the storm I'd been waiting for all winter, the one that would cut me off from the outside world until spring. Usually, that thought made me feel safe and protected. Now it just made me feel trapped. I spent the morning bringing in extra firewood and checking my food supplies. Everything looked good. Plenty of preserved meat, canned vegetables from my garden, bags of flour and rice. I could last until April easy, maybe longer. But when I went to check my smokehouse, something had changed again. The meat wasn't just organized now. It was arranged in patterns. The strips of jerky formed perfect lines, running from one side of the shed to the other. The hams hung in a circle around the center of the room. Even the salt pork was stacked in neat little pyramids. It looked like some kind of message, but I couldn't figure out what it meant. I stood there staring at it for maybe 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the footprints in the fresh snow outside the door. They were huge, bigger than any human foot I'd ever seen, maybe 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. But they weren't bear tracks either. They had toe marks, 5 of them, like fingers. And they were deep, pressed down into the snow like whatever made. They weighed a lot more than it should. The tracks led from my smokehouse toward the woods, then disappeared under the trees where the snow wasn't as thick. I followed them as far as I could, but they just faded away on the rocky ground near the creek. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my rifle steady. Something was living in these woods, something big enough to make tracks like that. And it had been in my smokehouse, touching my meat, arranging it like some kind of art project. I went back to the cabin and locked every door and window. Then I sat down and tried to think this through like a reasonable man. Maybe it was a bear walking on its back legs. Bears could do that sometimes, and their paws might look different in deep snow. But bears didn't organize meat into patterns. Bears just ate whatever they could find and left the rest scattered around. Maybe it was a person, someone wearing big boots or snowshoes. But who would come all the way up here in a snowstorm? And why would they break into my smokehouse just to rearrange things? I was still trying to work it out when I heard the sound from my processing shed. It was that grinding noise again, but louder now, like someone was running an electric saw cutting through bone. But I didn't have electricity up here, just oil lamps and candles for light. I grabbed Mary and crept to the back window. There was that bright light again, shining through the gaps in the shed walls, shadows moving around inside, working at something on my cutting table. This time, I wasn't going to just hide and wonder. I opened the back door and stepped out into the snow. The cold hit me like a slap, and the snow was already covering my boots, but I could see everything clear in that strange light. It was coming from inside my shed, bright as day, but with a weird blue color that hurt my eyes. I walked slow toward the building, trying not to make noise in the crunching snow. The grinding sound got louder with each step. Now I could hear other things too, a wet, slapping sound like someone throwing meat around, and something that sounded almost like humming, deep and low. I reached the side of the shed and pressed my face against a gap between the boards. What I saw inside didn't make any sense at first. My eyes couldn't put it together right. There was something big moving around my cutting table. At first I thought it was a man in a heavy coat, but it was too tall and too wide. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees should be, and it was covered in dark, matted hair that looked wet and sticky. But the worst part was what it was doing. It had pieces of meat on my table, looked like parts of a deer, but it wasn't. Cutting them up like normal. It was pushing them together, mashing them into new shapes. Its huge hands were working the meat like clay, stretching and molding it into something that looked almost like a person. I watched it shape what might have been arms and legs, a body, even something that could have been a head. The Meat moved under its hands like it was alive, flowing and changing shape, and that humming sound was coming from the thing itself, vibrating through its chest. Then it stopped working and turned toward the wall, toward me. I couldn't see its face clearly through the gap, but I could see its eyes. They glowed with the same blue light that filled the shed, and they were looking right at me. I ran, stumbled through the snow back to my cabin, slammed the door behind me, and pushed my heavy table in front of it. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it might give out. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely light the oil lamp. The grinding sound stopped. Everything went quiet except for the wind blowing snow against my windows. I sat in that chair all night, rifle ready, waiting for it to come for me. But nothing happened. When the sun came up, I looked out at my processing shed. The strange light was gone. Everything looked normal, but I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it had seen me too. Around noon, I worked up the courage to check the shed. The door was closed, just like I'd left it. But when I looked inside, there was something new on my cutting table. It was made of meat, but shaped like a man. About 3 feet tall, with arms and legs and a round head. The meat looked fresh, like it had just been cut, but it was all stuck together somehow. And in the middle of the head, where the face should, someone had carved 2 deep holes that looked like eyes. Next to it was a piece of paper, old and yellow. Written on it in shaky handwriting were the words, "Hello, Walter. We need to talk." I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on Union flyers back in Chicago. It was Jimmy O'Brien's. I dropped the paper like it was on fire and backed away from the table. My whole body was shaking, and I felt sick to my stomach. Jimmy had been dead for 3 years. I watched him die. I saw them carry his body away, but there was his handwriting, clear as day. The same messy letters he used to write on those Union papers he handed out at the plant gate. I ran back to my cabin and slammed the door. Then I sat down and tried to think this through. Maybe I was going crazy. Maybe living alone for so long had finally broken something in my head. Maybe I was seeing things that weren't really there. But the paper was real. The meat sculpture was real. And those footprints in the snow were definitely real. That night, I heard it moving around outside. Heavy footsteps in the snow, circling my cabin over and over. Sometimes it would stop at my door and just stand there. I could hear it breathing, deep, slow breaths that sounded wet and thick. Once, it scratched at the door with what sounded like claws. Long, scraping sounds that made my teeth hurt. But it never tried to break in. It was just letting me know. It was there. The next morning there was another note slipped under my door. "You left me to die, Walter. But I understand. You were scared. I was scared too." Same handwriting. Same yellow paper that looked old and crumpled. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at those words for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it was really Jimmy, somehow still alive or talking to me from wherever dead people go. If it was him, maybe I could finally say I was sorry. Maybe I could explain why I didn't help him that day. But another part of me knew this was wrong. This was something else, something that was using Jimmy's memory to get to me. The third note came that afternoon, stuck to my window where I couldn't miss it. "I don't blame you, Walter, but the others might, the ones who died because you stayed. Quiet. They might not be so understanding." My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the paper. What others? Jimmy was the only one who died. That day, wasn't he? But then I started remembering things I'd tried to forget. Other workers who got hurt after Jimmy died. Safety accidents that maybe weren't so accidental. Men who spoke up about dangerous conditions and then had bad things happen to them. If I'd testified about what I saw, maybe the company men would have been arrested. Maybe other workers would have been safer. Maybe I could have saved lives by being brave just once. That night, the thing came closer than ever before. I was sitting by my window, when I saw its face pressed against the glass. It wasn't human, but it wasn't completely animal either. It had the basic shape of a man's face, but stretched out and wrong. Its eyes were those same glowing blue lights I'd seen in the shed. Its mouth was full of teeth that looked like they belonged in a wolf's head. But the worst part was that it was smiling at me. Not mean or angry, but sad and friendly, like it felt sorry for me. It tapped on the glass with one huge finger, then pointed toward my processing shed. The message was clear. It wanted me to come outside. I shook my head and backed away from the window, but it just kept pointing and smiling that horrible, sad smile. Finally, it walked away. But in the morning, I found something that made me change my mind about staying inside. All my stored meat was gone. Every piece of jerky, every ham, every strip of bacon, all of it taken from my smokehouse. Even the fresh meat in my root cellar had disappeared. The only food I had left was some canned vegetables and a bag of flour. Without that meat, I wouldn't last until spring. I'd starve long before the snow melted enough for me to get to town. There was a new note on my door. "We can help each other, Walter. You know how to work with meat. I know how to make meat work for you." That evening, I made a decision that I knew was probably stupid, but I was out of choices. I took my rifle and walked to the processing shed. The door was open, and that blue light was glowing inside again. I could see the creature waiting for me at my cutting table. When I stepped inside, it turned to look at me. Up close, it was even bigger than I'd thought, maybe 10 feet tall, with shoulders wide as a doorway. Its fur was dark and matted with what looked like dried blood, but its eyes weren't mean. They looked tired and old, and maybe a little lonely. It pointed to the table. There was fresh meat there, a whole deer, perfectly cut and ready to process. Next to it were my tools, cleaned and sharpened better than I'd ever managed to do myself. The creature made a sound that might have been talking, but the words were too deep and rumbled for me to understand. Then it picked up my cleaver and held it out to me. I knew what it wanted. It wanted me to work, to cut meat the way I knew, and how. And God help me, I took the cleaver. The meat felt different under my hands, warmer than it should be. And when I made the first cut, the flesh seemed to move on its own, flowing and reshaping itself as I worked. The creature watched me and made those deep, rumbling sounds that almost sounded like approval. When I finished cutting the deer into portions, it arranged the pieces into patterns on the table. Not random patterns like before, but shapes that looked almost like letters, like it was trying to write something with meat. I worked with it for 3 hours that night. When we were done, it pointed to a corner of the shed where my missing food had been stacked in neat piles. All of it was there, plus more, fresh cuts I'd never seen before. As I gathered up my food to take back to the cabin, the creature touched my shoulder with one huge hand. Its touch was gentle, almost fatherly. When I looked up at its face, I could have sworn I saw Jimmy O'Brien looking back at me. "Thank you, Walter," it said in Jimmy's voice. "I knew you'd help me eventually. You always were a good man, just scared." That's when I noticed something that made my blood go cold. My hands were changing. The skin was getting tougher and darker. My fingers were growing longer and more pointed, and I could feel something happening inside my arms, like my bones were shifting and reshaping themselves. I looked at the creature and realized what it was offering me. Not just food for the winter, not just survival, partnership. For the next week, I worked with the creature every night. My hands kept changing, getting stronger and more sure with the knives. The meat responded to my touch like it was still alive, bending and shaping itself however I wanted. The creature, I started thinking of it as Jimmy, even though I knew it wasn't really him, showed me things I'd never learned in all my years. As a butcher, how to make meat stay fresh without salt or smoke, how to join pieces together so they moved like they had muscles and bones inside them. "You're learning fast, Walter," it said in Jimmy's voice one night as we worked. You always were the best cutter at the plant. Even the bosses said so. That was true. I had been the best. Before everything went wrong, I took pride in my work. Clean cuts, no waste, everything done right the first time. I have something to show you, Jimmy said. He led me outside to a clearing behind my cabin that I'd never paid much attention to before. There were others there, dozens of them. They looked like people at first, standing in neat rows like they were waiting for something. But when I got closer, I could see they were made of meat, just like that first small figure I'd found on my table. Some were the size of children, others tall as grown men. All of them had that same fresh-cut look, like they'd just been made. These are my helpers, Jimmy said. Each one is made from someone who understood what we're trying to do here. People who knew how to work with their hands. People who weren't afraid to get dirty. One of them turned to look at me, and I recognized the face. It was old Pete Ramsey from down the mountain, but Pete's eyes were gone, replaced by those same blue lights that glowed in Jimmy's head. Pete came up to check on you last week, Jimmy explained. He was worried about you living alone up here. Good man, Pete. He understood what we needed when I explained it to him. My stomach felt sick. What did you do to him? I gave him purpose, Walter, same as I'm giving you, same as I'll give others when you help me find them. That's when I understood what it really wanted, not just a partner to help with the meat. It wanted me to find people, to bring them here so it could turn them into those things standing in the clearing. Think about it, Jimmy said, putting his huge hand on my shoulder. No more loneliness, no more guilt. You'll have all the company you want and they'll never leave you. They'll never judge you for being scared. I looked at the meat people standing there so quiet and still. They didn't look unhappy. They didn't look like anything at all. What about the real Jimmy? I asked. What happened to him after he died? The creature was quiet for a long time. When it spoke again, its voice wasn't quite Jimmy's anymore. It was deeper, older, like something that had been in these mountains for a very long time. Jimmy's gone, Walter. Has been for 3 years. But his anger stayed behind. His hurt. His disappointment in people who were supposed to help him but didn't. That's what I am now. That's what feeds me. It turned to look at me with those glowing eyes. You can join him if you want. Just let me finish the work on your hands, and you won't have to carry that guilt anymore. You won't have to remember being afraid. I looked down at my hands. They were almost completely changed now. The skin thick and dark, the fingers long and sharp. When I flexed them, I could feel new strength there, power I'd never had before. Or, the creature continued, you can help me find others. People living alone like you. People who might understand what we're offering. You know how to talk to them, how to make them trust you. I thought about other folks scattered through these mountains. Hermits and loners and people running from something just like I was. Good people who just wanted to be left alone. I need an answer, Walter, it said. The snow's getting deeper. Spring's still months away. Choose now or choose never. I looked at Pete's meat face staring at me with those empty blue holes. I looked at my changing hands. I thought about Jimmy O'Brien bleeding on that factory floor while I stood there doing nothing. Then I thought about something else. The money I sent to Jimmy's widow every month. $20 wasn't much, but it was something. It was the only brave thing I'd done in 3 years. Maybe it was time to do another brave thing. No, I said. The creature's face changed. For just a second, I could see what it really was underneath. Something old and hungry and angry that had been feeding on guilt and fear for a long time. No, it asked in a voice that wasn't Jimmy's at all anymore. I won't help you hurt people, and I won't let you turn me into one of those things. I pulled out the bottle of moonshine I always carried and started pouring it over the meat people in the clearing. They didn't move or try to stop me, just stood there while the alcohol soaked into them. You can't destroy them all, Walter. the creature said. "And you can't destroy me. I've been in these mountains longer than you've been alive." "Maybe not," I said, pulling out my lighter, "but I can try." I dropped the flame onto the nearest meat person. It caught fire fast, the moonshine making it burn bright and hot. The flames spread to the others one by one. The creature let out a sound like nothing I'd ever heard before. Pain and anger and something that might have been fear all mixed together. It lunged at me with those huge hands, but I was already running. I made it back to my cabin and grabbed my rifle and all the moonshine I had left. Then I went to my processing shed and poured alcohol over everything. The table, the tools, the walls. All of it soaked with years of blood and meat. The creature was right behind me, roaring and clawing at the air. But when I lit the match and dropped it, the whole shed went up like a bomb. The fire spread fast, catching the smokehouse and then the cabin itself. I stood in the snow and watched everything I'd built for 3 years burn down to nothing. The creature stood in the flames, not burning, but screaming. As the fire destroyed its meat helpers, it got smaller and weaker. By the time the flames died down, it was just a shadow moving in the smoke. "You can't run forever, Walter," it called after me as I walked away into the woods. "I know where you came from. I know where you'll go." Maybe it was right. Maybe I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for it to find me again. But at least I'd finally done something brave. At least this time, I didn't. Just stand there and watch while someone got hurt. I walked through the snow until I reached the old logging road. Then I kept walking until I got to town, told the sheriff my cabin caught fire and I lost everything. He didn't ask too many questions. Things like that happened in the mountains sometimes. I used my savings to buy a bus ticket to California. Started over again in a new place, with a new job, but I kept sending that $20 to Jimmy's wife every month. And sometimes when I was cutting meat at my new job, I'd look at my hands and remember how they'd started to change. They looked normal now, but late at night, when I was alone, I could still feel something different about them. Something that reminded me of those cold mountain nights when I worked beside a creature that wore my dead friend's face. I never went back to Arkansas, but sometimes I wonder if it's still there, waiting in those woods, still looking for people who know how to work with meat, still feeding on guilt and fear and the things we're too scared to face. I hope not, but I guess I'll never really know for sure. The end. My name is Marcus O'Sullivan, but everyone calls me Mac. I'm 41 years old, and I spend most of my time underwater. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Up here on dry land, I can't breathe right. My chest gets tight, and my hands shake. But down there in the cold, dark water off the Washington coast, I'm home. This morning started like any other. I woke up in my little house. It used to be where the lighthouse keeper lived, but nobody keeps the lighthouse anymore. The sun wasn't even up yet, just a thin line of grey light across the water, perfect diving weather. I pulled on my wetsuit, the thick black rubber that keeps me alive in these freezing waters. The Pacific Northwest doesn't mess around. Even in summer, this water can kill you in minutes if you're not careful, but I've been diving these waters for 20 years. I know every rock, every current, every dangerous spot. My boat, the Mary Rose, sat waiting at the little dock. She's not much to look at, 30 feet of beat-up fishing boat that I bought cheap. But she gets me where I need to go, and that's all that matters. I loaded my diving gear, tanks, weights, my collection bags, and my knife. Always bring a knife when you're diving alone. The abalone beds were 12 miles out, in deep water where the Coast Guard doesn't usually patrol. Abalone are these big sea snails that rich people pay crazy money for. They taste okay, I guess, but mostly people want them because they're hard to get. The state says you need licenses and limits and all that, but licenses cost money I don't have, and limits don't pay my bills. I started the engine and headed out into the grey morning. The water was calm, which was good. Rough seas make diving dangerous, and I was already taking enough risks. The lighthouse behind me still had its light on, even though nobody runs it anymore. Sometimes I wonder who keeps turning it on. But I had bigger things to worry about. 20 minutes later, I reached my favorite spot. I call it the garden because the abalone there are big and fat and easy to find. I'd been diving here for 3 years, taking just enough to make money, but not enough to clean the place out. That's the smart way to do it. I put on my gear and checked everything twice. Mask, fins, regulator, knife, collection bag. In the Navy, they taught us that checking your gear saves your life. That was a long time ago, but some lessons stick with you forever. The water was dark green and cold, even through my wetsuit. I sank down slowly, watching the light from above get dimmer and dimmer. 40 feet down, then 60, then 80. This is where the good abalone live, in the deep water where most divers won't go. But something was wrong. The rocks where I usually found dozens of abalone were empty. Not just picked clean, destroyed. Big chunks of rock were missing, like something huge had scraped across the bottom. The seaweed was torn up, floating in twisted pieces. And there was a smell in the water, something metallic and strange that made my regulator taste funny. I swam around, looking for any signs of the abalone. Nothing. Whatever had happened here, it was recent. The torn seaweed was still fresh, and the broken rocks had sharp edges that hadn't been worn smooth by the current yet. My chest started to feel tight, but not from the water pressure. This was the feeling I got on land, the one that made me need to dive in the first place. Something was very wrong here, and I didn't know what it was. I had to find abalone somewhere. The bank wanted their boat payment next week, and my lawyer needed money for the court case. Some guy said I hit his fishing boat last month, which was complete garbage, but lawyers cost money whether you're right or wrong. I swam deeper, down to the 100-foot mark, where the really big abalone sometimes hide. The water got darker and colder, and I had to turn on my underwater light. That's when I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, watching me from the darkness. Fish eyes, crab eyes, octopus eyes, all staring at me like they were waiting for something. In 20 years of diving, I'd never seen sea creatures act like this. They usually swim away when they see a diver, but these just watched. I tried to ignore them and keep looking for abalone, but everywhere I went, more eyes appeared. A school of rockfish followed me like they were herding me somewhere. A giant Pacific octopus came out of its cave and just sat there, watching. Even the crabs stopped moving and stared. The metallic taste in my regulator got stronger. I checked my air gauge, still plenty left, but something about the water itself felt wrong. It was too warm in some places, too cold in others, like invisible currents were mixing water that shouldn't be mixed. That's when I heard it. A sound like whale song, but different. Whales sound lonely and beautiful. This sound was angry. It came from somewhere deep below me, rising up through the water like a voice from the bottom of the ocean. I'd heard enough. Whatever was happening down here, I wanted no part of it. I started swimming back to the surface, but the fish followed. Me. All of them. Like I was leading some kind of underwater parade. When I finally broke the surface and climbed back into my boat, I looked down into the water. All those eyes were still there, just under the surface, watching me, waiting. I started the engine and headed for home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The ocean I'd known and loved for 20 years was trying to tell me something. And whatever it was, I didn't think I was going to like it. The next few days, I tried to forget what happened down there. I told myself I was seeing things. Maybe I'd gone too deep or stayed down too long. Nitrogen does funny things to your brain sometimes. Makes you think you see stuff that isn't there. But every morning when I woke up, I checked my tide charts. Something was wrong with them, too. I keep detailed records of every tide for the past 5 years. High tide, low tide, when they happen, how high the water gets. It's important when you live on a tiny island. Get caught sleeping when a big tide comes in, and you might wake up underwater. The tides weren't matching my charts anymore. Yesterday, low tide was supposed to happen at 6 in the morning. Instead, it came at 4. High tide should have reached 12 feet. It hit 15. Small changes, but in this business, small changes can kill you. I called the Coast Guard station in Seattle. Maybe they knew something. "This is Mac O'Sullivan, out on Serpent Island," I said. "You guys getting any weird reports about the tides?" The radio crackled. "Mac, yeah, we've had a few calls. Nothing to worry about. Probably just the weather system moving through." "What weather system?" "The one coming in from the west. Should hit you tomorrow night. Big storm. You might want to head to the mainland for a few days." I looked out my window. Clear blue sky. No clouds anywhere. "I don't see any storm." "Trust me, Mac. It's coming. And it's going to be a bad one." I hung up the radio and went outside. The air was dead calm. No wind, no clouds. Even the seagulls were quiet, which never happens. But the ocean looked different. The water was too still, like glass. And the color was wrong, more green than blue, with dark patches that moved like shadows. That evening I tried diving again. Different spot this time, closer to shore. Maybe the problem was just in the deep water. The shallow reefs should have been full of life. Starfish, sea urchins, small fish hiding in the rocks. Instead, I found empty water. Everything was gone. Even the seaweed looked sick, brown and dying instead of the healthy green it should be. I was about to surface when I saw the first strange current. It came out of nowhere, a stream of water moving in a perfect circle, not like a whirlpool, those spin and pull things down. This was different. It moved like it had a purpose, like something was guiding it. I swam closer to get a better look. The current was warm, much warmer than the surrounding water, and inside it tiny lights were flashing, like fireflies, but underwater. I'd never seen anything like it. The current moved away from me, heading toward the deeper water. I followed. It curious despite my growing fear. It led me to a spot I knew well, a flat area of sand, about 60 feet down. But the sand was gone. In its place was a perfect circle of black rock, smooth as glass. The strange current circled the black rock 3 times, then disappeared. I floated there, staring at the rock. It didn't belong here. I'd dived this exact spot dozens of times. There had never been any black rock. The bottom was always sand and small stones. A sound made me turn around, that whale song again, but closer this time, much closer. And with it came a feeling I couldn't explain, like something huge was watching me, something that didn't like what it saw. I swam to the surface as fast as I safely could. That night, the storm hit. I woke up to the sound of wind howling around. My little house. Rain hammered against the windows like someone throwing rocks. The lighthouse was flashing on and off, even though I knew the power was out. It's been out for years. I checked my barometer. The pressure was dropping fast, faster than I'd ever seen. My weather radio was picking up emergency broadcasts from Seattle, warning of a historic storm system that had appeared without warning. By morning, the storm was gone. But my boat was in trouble. The Mary Rose was still tied to the dock, but something had hit her hard during the night. Her hull was scraped and dented, and her engine wouldn't start. Worse, her radio was dead. I was stuck on the island with no way to call for help. That's when I noticed the tide. It was higher than it should be, much higher. The dock that was usually 6 feet above the water was now only 2 feet, and it wasn't going down. I checked my tide charts again. Low tide should have started an hour ago, but the water kept rising. By noon, it was lapping at the bottom of my house. By evening, I had to move everything I cared about to the 2nd floor. The island was shrinking. I spent that night watching the water from my upstairs window. It glowed sometimes, with the same tiny lights I'd seen in the strange current. And In that glow, I could see shapes moving, big shapes swimming in circles around my island like they were waiting for something. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Tommy's voice calling from the water. Tommy Morrison had been my best friend in the Navy. We'd trained together, dived together, trusted each other with our lives, until the day I didn't trust him enough to die with him. The submarine rescue training was supposed to be routine. We were practicing emergency exits from a damaged sub 60 feet underwater. Something went wrong with the air system. Tommy got trapped when a hatch jammed. I had a choice: stay and try to save him, or swim to the surface before my air ran out. I chose to live. Tommy chose to die. The Navy called it an accident. Bad equipment, they said. Nothing anyone could have done, but I knew better. I could have stayed. I could have tried harder. Instead, I left my best friend to drown alone in the dark. Now his voice was calling to me from the bottom of the ocean. By morning, the water had risen another foot. My house sits on the highest point of the island, about 15 feet above normal high tide. Now there was maybe 6 feet left. The dock was completely underwater. So was the shed where I kept my diving gear. I waded out to where the shed used to be and dove down to get my equipment. The water was crystal clear, but wrong somehow. Too warm, and it tasted like metal coins. My diving gear was still there, but when I picked up my tank, something strange happened. Fish came out of nowhere, dozens of them swimming in perfect formation around me. Rockfish, lingcod, even a few salmon that had no business being in salt water this deep. They didn't act scared or curious. They acted like guards. I ignored them and grabbed what I needed: air tank, regulator, mask, fins. If the island kept shrinking, I might need to spend time underwater just to survive. When I got back to the house, I found something that made my blood turn cold. Wet footprints leading from the water to my front door. They weren't my footprints. They were smaller and they had a strange shape, like feet that had been underwater too long. The skin was wrinkled and soft, leaving weird marks on my wooden porch. I followed the prints to my door. It was standing wide open. I always lock my door, even though I'm the only person for miles. Old habits from living on the mainland. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Then I saw the message. Someone had written words on my kitchen table using wet seaweed. The letters were sloppy and hard to read, but I could make them out. You left me. My hands started shaking. I grabbed a towel and wiped the message away, but the smell of dead fish lingered in the air. The seaweed was still wet, which meant whoever put it there had been in my house recently. Maybe they were still there. I searched every room, every closet, every corner. Nothing. But the smell of the ocean was everywhere, stronger than it should be. Like something from the deep water had been walking through my house, dripping salt water on everything. That afternoon, I tried to fix my boat's engine. The Mary Rose was my only way off the island, storm or no storm. But when I opened the engine compartment, I found it full of barnacles, hundreds of them, growing on every surface, like they'd been there for years. Barnacles don't grow that fast. It takes months, sometimes years, for them to cover something like that. But these were fresh, still alive, still feeding, some were the size of my fist. I tried to scrape them off, but they were stuck tight. And every time I pulled one loose, dark water poured out of it. Water that smelled like the deepest parts of the ocean, where no light ever reaches. By evening, I could see the bottom of the island. The water was so clear now that I could look straight down and see rocks and sand 20 feet below my house, and moving between those rocks were shapes that didn't belong there, long, dark shapes that moved like snakes but were too big to be any sea creature I knew about. They circled the island slowly, never stopping, never surfacing, just circling and waiting. That's when I saw the boat. It came out of the fog like a ghost ship, moving without sound. An old fishing boat, maybe 40 feet long, with nets hanging from its sides. But something was wrong with it. The paint was faded and peeling, and seaweed hung from its rails like curtains. As it got closer, I could see that the windows were dark. No lights, no signs of life. But it was heading straight for my island, moving against the current in a way that didn't make sense. I waved my arms and shouted, hoping whoever was on board could help me. The boat kept coming until it was close enough for me to see inside. The wheelhouse. That's when I stopped shouting. The boat was full of people, but they weren't moving. They sat at the controls, stood at the rails, hung over the nets, all of them perfectly still. Their skin was white as fish bellies, and their eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. I knew some of those faces. Jim Bradley, who used to fish these waters before he disappeared 2 years ago. Sarah Chen, the marine biologist who vanished last summer while studying sea life. And in the wheelhouse, hands still on the steering, wheel was Captain Roy Hutchins. The Coast Guard had been looking for Roy for 3 months. They were all there, perfectly preserved, like the cold salt water had kept them fresh. But they were definitely dead. Their mouths hung open, and I could see that their lungs were full of water. They had drowned, but somehow they were still, sailing. The boat drifted past my island without stopping. As it disappeared back into the fog, I heard that whale song again. But now I understood what it really was. It was the sound of voices calling from underwater. The voices of everyone who had died in these waters, everyone who had been taken by whatever lived in the deep, and they were all singing the same thing. Come down to us. Come down and join us. The water is warm here. The water is home. I put on my diving gear as the water reached my front door. There wasn't much choice left. The island was down to maybe 2 feet of dry land around my house. In an hour, maybe less, there would be nothing left above water. I could sit here and wait to drown, or I could go down there and face whatever was calling to me. My hands shook as I checked my air tank. Full tank, good for maybe 40 minutes underwater. Plenty of time to find out what wanted me so badly down there. Maybe not enough time to come back up. I walked into the rising water and put on my fins. The ocean felt different against my skin, warmer than it should be, almost welcoming, like it was inviting me home. 20 feet from where my house used to sit on dry land, I took a deep breath and went under. The water was the clearest I'd ever seen. I could look down and see the bottom, maybe 100 feet below, and scattered across that bottom were things that shouldn't be there. Cars, boats, pieces of houses, all arranged in neat rows, like someone had been collecting them for years. I saw Jim Bradley's fishing boat, the one that disappeared with him. Sarah Chen's research vessel. A dozen other boats I recognized from missing vessel reports, but they weren't wrecked. They looked perfect, like they'd just been parked down there. And moving between them were people, not swimming, walking. Along the bottom like they were on dry land, their feet touching the sand, their hair floating around their faces like seaweed. They moved slowly, but with purpose, like they had somewhere important to be. I swam closer and saw their faces, white as bone, eyes wide open, mouths slightly open too. But they were aware. When I passed over them, they looked up at me. Some raised their hands and waved, like they were greeting an old friend. Then I saw Tommy. He was standing next to a submarine, the same kind we'd trained in during the Navy. He looked exactly like he had 15 years ago, except for his skin. It was pale and bloated, like he'd been underwater for a very long time. But his eyes were bright and alert. He saw me coming and smiled. Not a scary smile, but the same friendly grin he used to give me when we were partners. He raised his hand and pointed towards something behind him. That's when I saw it. It was huge, bigger than anything that should exist in these waters. It looked like a sea snake, but thick as a subway car and longer than a football field. Its skin was dark green and covered in scales that shifted color, like oil on water. And it had more than one head, 3 heads, maybe 4, all moving independently. Each head was the size of a small car, with eyes like black dinner plates and mouths full of teeth that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. But the strangest thing was how peaceful it looked. It wasn't thrashing around or acting aggressive. It was just resting on the bottom, watching me with those enormous eyes, waiting. Tommy swam up to me, moving through the water like he'd been born in it. When he got close enough, he spoke. I don't know how I could hear him underwater, but I could. His voice sounded exactly like it always had. "Hey, Mac. Took you long enough to get down here." "Tommy, I'm sorry. I should have stayed. I should have tried to save you." He shook his head. "You did what you had to do. I don't blame you for that." "Then why is all this happening?" Tommy looked back at the enormous sea creature. "She's been sleeping down here for thousands of years, but lately too many people have been taking from the ocean without giving anything. Aback, overfishing, pollution, killing things just for money. She woke up angry. What does she want? She wants the ocean to be left alone. She wants people to respect the water and everything in it. But mostly, she wants someone who understands the sea to help her protect it." I looked at the creature again. One of its heads had turned toward me, and I could feel its intelligence, ancient and deep as the ocean itself. It wasn't evil, just tired of seeing its home destroyed. "What happens if I say no?" Tommy's expression grew sad. "Then you'll drown up there when your island disappears. And she'll keep taking people, one by one, until someone says yes. And if I say yes, you become part of the ocean forever. You help her guard these waters. You make sure people only take what they need and give back what they can. It's not a bad life, Mac. The water is warm down here, and you're never alone." I looked around at all the other people walking on the ocean floor. They seemed peaceful, content, like they'd found something up on the surface that they'd been looking for their whole lives. But I'd never see sunlight again, never feel dry land under my feet, never breathe air that didn't come from a tank. "I need time to think," I said. Tommy nodded. "She'll give you time, but not much. Your air won't last forever." I swam up a little, trying to clear my head. Above me, I could see the last tiny bit of my island, barely breaking the surface. Soon, that would be gone too. I thought about my life up there. A broken-down boat I couldn't afford to fix, legal bills I couldn't pay, living alone in a lighthouse that didn't work, diving illegally just to make enough money to survive. What kind of life was that? Down here I could protect the ocean I'd always loved. I could make sure other people didn't make the same mistakes I had, and I wouldn't be alone. Tommy was here, and dozens of others who'd made the same choice. But I'd be dead, or something like dead. I checked my air gauge. 15 minutes left. The sea creature's heads all turned toward me now, waiting for my answer. Its eyes weren't angry or threatening. They were patient, like it had all the time in the world, which I guess it did. I looked up one more time at the tiny piece of island above me. Then I looked down at Tommy, at all the peaceful faces of the people who'd chosen to stay. I made my choice. I swam down to the creature and placed my hand on its massive head. The skin was warm and smooth, like touching the ocean itself. Images flashed through my mind. The health of every reef, the location of every school of fish, the migration patterns of whales, the damage that pollution and overfishing had done to this beautiful world under the water. I understood now why it was angry, and I understood what I had to do. I took out my regulator and let the last of my air escape into the water. The ocean rushed into my lungs, cold and salty and somehow welcoming. For a moment, I panicked, fighting the water, trying to swim to the surface. Then the panic passed and everything became peaceful. I was home. The surface world thinks I disappeared during a storm. They found pieces of my boat washed up on shore, but they never found me. The Coast Guard called off the search after a week. But I'm still here, walking the bottom of the ocean with Tommy and the others, watching over these waters, making sure people treat the sea with respect. Sometimes when a boat passes overhead, I swim up to look. If it's a fishing boat, taking only what it needs, I let it pass. If it's someone like I used to be, taking too much, being greedy, hurting the ocean for money, well, let's just say the sea serpent is always hungry, and the ocean is always ready to welcome new guardians home. My name is Marcus O'Sullivan, but everyone calls me Mac. I'm 41 years old, and I spend most of my time underwater, not because I have to, but because I want to. Up here on dry land, I can't breathe right. My chest gets tight, and my hands shake. But down there, in the cold, dark water off the Washington coast, I'm home. This morning started like any other. I woke up in my little house. It used to be where the lighthouse keeper lived, but nobody keeps the lighthouse anymore. The sun wasn't even up yet, just a thin line of grey light across the water. Perfect diving weather. I pulled on my wetsuit, the thick black rubber that keeps me alive in these freezing waters. The Pacific Northwest doesn't mess around. Even in summer, this water can kill you in minutes if you're not careful. But I've been diving these waters for 20 years. I know every rock, every current, every dangerous spot. My boat, the Mary Rose, sat waiting at the little dock. She's not much to look at, 30 feet of beat-up fishing boat that I bought cheap. But she gets me where I need to go, and that's all that matters. I loaded my diving gear, tanks, weights, my collection bags and my knife. Always bring a knife when you're diving alone. The abalone beds were 12 miles out, in deep water where the Coast Guard doesn't usually patrol. Abalone are these big sea snails that rich people pay crazy money for. They taste okay, I guess, but mostly people want them because they're hard to get. The state says you need licenses and limits and all that, but licenses cost money I don't have, and limits don't pay my bills. I started the engine and headed out into the gray morning. The water was calm, which was good. Rough seas make diving dangerous, and I was already taking enough risks. The lighthouse behind me still had its light on, even though nobody runs it anymore. Sometimes I wonder who keeps turning it on. But I had bigger things to worry about. 20 minutes later, I reached my favorite spot. I call it the garden because the abalone there are big and fat and easy to find. I'd been diving here for 3 years, taking just enough to make money, but not enough to clean the place out. That's the smart way to do it. I put on my gear and checked everything twice. Mask, fins, regulator, knife, collection bag. In the Navy, they taught us that checking your gear saves your life. That was a long time ago, but some lessons stick with you forever. The water was dark green and cold, even through my wetsuit. I sank down slowly, watching the light from above get dimmer and dimmer. 40 feet down, then 60, then 80. This is where the good abalone live, in the deep water where most divers won't go. But something was wrong. The rocks where I usually found dozens of abalone were empty, not just picked clean, destroyed. Big chunks of rock were missing, like something huge had scraped across the bottom. The seaweed was torn up, floating in twisted pieces, and there was a smell in the water, something metallic and strange that made my regulator taste funny. I swam around looking for any signs of the abalone. Nothing. Whatever had happened here, it was recent. The torn seaweed was still fresh, and the broken rocks had sharp edges that hadn't been worn smooth by the current yet. My chest started to feel tight, but not from the water pressure. This was the feeling I got on land, the one that made me need to dive in the first place. Something was very wrong here, and I didn't know what it was. I had to find abalone somewhere. The bank wanted their boat payment next week, and my lawyer needed money for the court case. Some guy said I hit his fishing boat last month, which was complete garbage, but lawyers cost money, whether you're right or wrong. I swam deeper, down to the 100-foot mark where the really big abalone sometimes hide. The water got darker and colder, and I had to turn on my underwater light. That's when I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, watching me from the darkness. Fish eyes, crab eyes, octopus eyes, all staring at me like they were waiting for something. In 20 years of diving, I'd never seen sea creatures act like this. They usually swim away when they see a diver, but these just watched. I tried to ignore them and keep looking for abalone, but everywhere I went, more eyes appeared. A school of rockfish followed me like they were herding me somewhere. A giant Pacific octopus came out of its cave and just sat there, watching. Even the crabs stopped moving and stared. The metallic taste in my regulator got stronger. I checked my air gauge. Still plenty left, but something about the water itself felt wrong. It was too warm in some places, too cold in others, like invisible currents were mixing water that shouldn't be mixed. That's when I heard it. A sound like whale song, but different. Whales sound lonely and beautiful. This sound was angry. It came from somewhere deep below me, rising up through the water, like a voice from the bottom of the ocean. I'd heard enough. Whatever was happening down here, I wanted no part of it. I started swimming back to the surface, but the fish followed. Me, all of them, like I was leading some kind of underwater parade. When I finally broke the surface and climbed back into my boat, I looked down into the water. All those eyes were still there, just under the surface, watching me, waiting. I started the engine and headed for home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The ocean I'd known and loved for 20 years was trying to tell me something, and whatever it was, I didn't think I was going to like it.